Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, November 19th Select Board meeting. We know the meeting has been properly warned because we entered into executive session at 5:30. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve minutes from the November 5th meeting.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Liz made that motion. Should I say that first? I am going to defer my remarks this evening to somebody else. Maybe Peter.
I have very quick remarks this evening, just to remind everybody who's watching that you still have 45 more minutes to come and vote in the school-related election that's being held today, a special election regarding amendments to the organizing documents related to the operation of the Wyndham Southeast School District. So that's at the first floor of the Municipal Center here, room 105. Polls close at 7 p.m. this evening. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Are there members of the Select Board who have comments and/or committee reports this evening?
Diversity Committee, Workforce Development Committee meets Thursday. So the next meeting we'll have a report.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Anybody else?
I don't at this time.
Okay, great. Then at this time, I will come to the community for public participation. This is an opportunity for you to bring up items that are not listed on tonight's agenda. George, come to the microphone, please, and then introduce yourself.
I'm George Harvey. I live here in Brattleboro. I think, as probably everybody on the Select Board knows, I keep a blog, which is related to energy and climate change. And I've been doing this for years. I probably look at over 400 headlines every day. And over the course of 8 years, that comes to over 1 million headlines. I'm able to watch changes take place. And I have come to you to tell you that I think things are taking an alarming turn. As you're aware, I'm sure, in October of last year, the IPCC said we had until 2030 to reduce our emissions by 45%, or we would not achieve an increase in global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius or less. It happens that about 6 months after that happened, scientists had released reports, this was actually about 6 months ago, reports saying that they had calculated the amount of time that it would take once the rules had been changed to do the work. And deducting that from the amount of time that was left, they concluded that all of the legislation, all of the regulations, and so forth that was required to support this would have to be completed by the end of 2020. Now, I don't have to point out to you, I think that means that it has to be done by the current Senate, which is unlikely to do anything. I won't even comment on the White House. Nancy Pelosi said that it would take 10 years to get anything through Congress. What this brings me to is, what can we do? And if we cannot do it on the federal level, then we're going to have to do it somewhere else. This is, and I should point out, the scientists were talking about what I call a non-disruptive approach. We could choose a federal disruptive approach, similar to what was done in 1942 when the automotive industry was told that they were not allowed to sell cars anymore, and that included 500,000 cars they had on dealers' lots. And people, in order to get gasoline, had to prove they needed a car, and they also had to prove that they had no more than 5 tires for their household. Basically, what's happened since that report by the scientists is that things have taken a turn for the worse. It is clear that climate change is happening at a speed that is a multiple of what scientists had expected only 2 years ago. The Gulf Stream has slowed down by 15%. This was not expected until the second half of this century. The permafrost is melting. The Russian government has people in it saying that they're worried that entire cities will literally collapse because their foundations are built on ice and the ice is not going to survive. The Tampa Bay Water Authority says that they're expecting that the water at Tampa Bay is going to rise by 8.5 feet during this century. That implies a rise of something over an inch every year. Basically, and now, and this is the thing that really brought me before you, the Fed is getting involved. And the Fed says that in the next 10 years, climate change and rising seas are going to have a profound influence on life in the United States. They're expecting, this is the head of the Fed talking, they're expecting that in regions, and that was their word, regions of the United States, it will not be possible to get a 30-year mortgage in 10 years because there won't be any expectation that the properties being mortgaged will be there in 30 years. We're entering into a time when we have to address climate change in a different way than expecting the federal government to do it in a non-disruptive fashion. And I just wanted to put this out to you that I think we have to expect to take things on ourselves because the federal government isn't going to save us. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Are there other members of the community that would like to speak about something that is not listed on tonight's agenda? Okay. Seeing nobody wanting to do that, we will now move into our unfinished business. Our first items being ordinance amendments concerning Green Street parking and stuff.
So this is your second reading. It'd be appropriate for you to open a public hearing in order to have the second reading, receive the public comment that may become forthcoming, and then have your final discussion and take final action on this. So you can open the public hearing.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Peter. At this time, we will open the public hearing. So this, if anybody hasn't read any of this, this involves having parking on Green Street directly in front of the school where people are already kind of more formalized. The practice is already there. We're formalizing the ordinance.
During the school day.
During the school day.
Yep.
So to allow parents to park there and run things inside and so forth.
Correct.
And then, was there a second thing?
Yeah, so the other thing is,
Oh.
it is aligning the regulations related to the periods of each day when it goes one way.
Right.
To make the ordinance align with what's already happening on the street, because we believe what's already happening on the street is the appropriate timing, and that we had an outdated ordinance that needed to be adjusted. It was reviewed by the Traffic Safety Committee after field work was done on this by multiple departments and Green Street school leadership, resulted in this recommendation. The Traffic Safety Committee recommended it. 2 weeks ago, you had first reading on it and decided to put it on for second reading and final adoption tonight.
Thank you. And for anybody who might not know, that's turning it into a one-way from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. to allow for drop-off from the school bus and from parents, and then again from 2:15 to 3:30 p.m. to allow for buses and pickup.
Exactly.
So now that that's been clarified, is there anybody here tonight who wishes to speak on this? Okay. Well, guess I will close the public hearing. I now close the public hearing. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory and makes a lot of sense, so I'm not surprised there's not a ton of conversation on it. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to make these changes.
I move to approve amendments to Appendix C of the Brattleboro Code of Ordinances, regulations governing the control of traffic as presented.
Excellent. Daniel has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, we now move on to our second item of unfinished business. This is the authorization for the town to join in multi-jurisdictional opioids litigation and a ratification of attorney's retainer agreement. At this point, I will pass this conversation over to Peter.
And I'll
then-
pass it on to Bob Fisher, our town attorney,
Go,
who
Bob.
will be providing
Thank
the
you.
insights on this.
So you really have three items for tonight. The first is whether to join in the suit, which is part of the multi-district litigation against opioid defendants brought in Ohio. But this suit would be joining the suit that Bennington brought Brattleboro naming any of the defendants that it chooses to bring. So this is a suit that goes against manufacturers of opioids, the distributors, pharmacies, and the pharmacy managers of how they distribute those pills. Part of the debate has been regarding the pharmacies as which pharmacies to name. Of course, if we start at the top with the manufacturers, they create these drugs, and they have, over the course of, let's say, the last 10 years, perhaps more, put these drugs out there knowing that they're very addictive. And these allegations are in the complaint that is available. I won't go into all of that. But then the distributors have also profited from distributing these pills to as many people as can be out there. And then those, the distribution are filled with, or the pills are distributed through the pharmacies getting prescriptions. The prescriptions, at least according to some studies, 80% of addicts started with a prescription of a legal opioid. And then when that ran out, that addiction needed somehow to be fed, and that turned over into a lot of the illegal drug part of this. So with regard, and the last time I was here at a meeting, there was some discussion as to, are the pharmacies at fault here? Pharmacies have a duty to not fill suspicious prescriptions. And from a national level, there is evidence that many of the national chains are not fulfilling their duty not to fill suspicious prescriptions. The question is, what do you do with your local pharmacies? And that's a decision that the board needs to make. We did have the police department run just what it could find against local pharmacies, and found nothing as far as criminal complaints here on a local basis. I don't know if all of the complaints would be to the local police or to offices of professional regulation or other entities statewide or federally that oversee pharmacies. But from the standpoint of the board will need to decide today whether or not to join this suit, and if so, whether to exclude local pharmacies. The second thing that the board is asked to do tonight is to ratify the retainer agreement with the Sakala law firm, which had to be done by a particular date. So Town Manager Elwell authorized me to sign that, asking that the board just ratify that. And then the last thing the board is asked to deal with tonight is whether or not to opt out of the national litigation that all towns and counties are part of this national group lawsuit unless they opt out. And again, that's a difficult decision for the board from the perspective of what the board and the town need to realize here is that you can't have double recovery. So if we have the suit that Brattleboro is bringing along with Bennington, and you're part of the national group, if you've got a same defendant out there, you can't recover twice from that defendant. If you decide to opt out, then the lawsuit that is being brought by Bennington, and if Brattleboro joins that, will go after what I think are many of the same defendants out there, but the recovery would be based on the allocation model that is determined in any settlement that suit would have, as compared to the national group, a much larger group, where any settlement is determined by a 75% vote of the members of that group. So from my perspective, and the board may wish to weigh in on this, but coming from a relatively small town when you compare us nationally. Some of how this, if there is a national settlement, that settlement may be based or getting down to a per capita recovery as to how any funds would be allocated out to the towns and counties across the nation. Given that you take larger cities that outweigh us from a population standpoint, it may make sense to opt out and go our own route. The attorney, Joanne Sakala, who is one of the lead attorneys for the Bennington and Brattleboro joins that, has been very responsive in answering the questions that the town has with regard to that. But again, it's a question, policy decision for the board to make. I'm happy to answer to the extent I can questions on this. I am by no means an expert on opioid litigation nationally, but certainly have been doing a lot of reading into these cases over the last several weeks and months.
Thank you, Bob. I'm sure that people have taken, I'm hoping that people who are here to speak tonight have taken the opportunity to read the paperwork from the lawsuit, which has been up on the town's website. We've obviously been discussing this amongst ourselves and have been reading these and mulling over this in probably the privacy of our homes as well as in meetings. And so I'm hoping that people who came to speak are at least mostly as informed as we are as to what a role of a pharmacy is and why we would be looking to include pharmacies in suits. I think at the last meeting I used an example, and Bob, I was hoping that you would correct me if I was dead wrong, and so now that we're in the same room, I'm gonna ask. I tried to call on my banking experience as a teller and to use willful blindness as a bit of an example of the role between where the pharmacist sits between the customer and the doctor, and how in banking you have an obligation that if a transaction's coming from within the bank that looks fishy, you have certain obligations on how you report that, and if something is coming from outside of the bank, you have the same obligation, and failure to follow those rules is punishable by fine, by jail time. It's a law, and the role of a pharmacist is similar. Is that dead wrong?
I think that willful blindness is a good analogy to this, and in the complaint they talk about how the manufacturers profit, the distributors profit from it, and they go on to say that the pharmacy defendants likewise did nothing to stem the flow of excess opioids into the towns. And part of that is through, and maybe this is too specific to your question, but through spread pricing is one of the footnotes that caught my eye in the complaint. Spread pricing is a phrase used to describe the practice of purposefully causing a reimbursement price to be higher than the actual acquisition cost. And so what this does with regard to pharmacies is it generally will have pharmacies stock their shelves with the commodity that generates the most profit. So if that goes hand in hand with a willful blindness, that is part of how the allegations here at least are made as against the pharmacies. So
Thank you.
it's maybe analogous to your willful blindness comment.
Thank you for that. I'd like to at this time open this conversation at the board level, and then I'm going to come to the community, and then we're going to come back to the board before we make our decision. Somebody on the board want to kick off this super awkward conversation?
Yeah.
Great.
Please. I just want to kind of pull out a couple of things from this lawsuit to provide some of the context. So it talks here about the responsibilities of pharmacies, and I guess we're going to spend most of our time talking about pharmacies at this point.
Well, thanks, Rob.
So it says the pharmacy defendants ignored their responsibilities under federal and state law to monitor, detect, investigate, refuse to fill, and report suspicious orders within which the pharmacy defendants knew or should have known were likely to be diverted, i.e. end up in like the illegal drug market, in and around, and in this case it's the town of Bennington, because that's who this suit was written for. And I wanted to kind of pull that out because we talked about like this refusing to fill something, but that's not the only part of the pharmacy's responsibility, right? So there's like, have you got procedures in place to monitor these prescriptions? Are you putting things in place to detect and investigate? And so, for example, when it comes to, let's see, hooray for sticky notes. When it comes to Walgreens, this is nationally, I'm not making any allegation about Walgreens here in Brattleboro. So, for example, one official at Walgreens tasked with monitoring suspicious orders said his department was not equipped for that work, that they created lists of suspicious orders that ran thousands of pages, but, and this is the language from the lawsuit, not mine, startlingly and against all statutory obligations, then merely shipped the suspicious orders without further review. So it gives you like an example of like how by failing to have a robust procedure in place, so it's not that the person who was tasked with doing this is a bad person, it's they didn't have something in place to actually do what they were required to do by law. And then, so that's Walgreens, not in Brattleboro necessarily, but somewhere. Rite Aid entered into an agreement to pay $5 million in civil penalties for violations and to enter into a compliance plan to ensure compliance with all requirements of the CSA, which is the Controlled Substances
Act,
maybe, and applicable DEA regulations to prevent diversion of controlled substances, and that this action was based on systemic violations of Rite Aid's obligation to prevent diversion across 53 Rite Aid locations. So within this suit, there were concrete examples of where some of our national chains have failed to do their duty as required by law. And as such, I at least feel that here in Brattleboro, it's appropriate for us to name those same chains that are in here in whatever, suit we engage in. I think the thing that I felt really on the fence about over these last few weeks is whether or not we were doing the right thing by choosing to include a local pharmacy or not choosing to include a local pharmacy. So like going back to the data, Rite Aid put out 2,726,301 dosage units of opioids into Brattleboro and the surrounding area between 2006 and 2012. Hotel Pharmacy put in 2,419,904 units. And then Walgreens, 2,099,592, and then much smaller amounts for other places. And so during the last few weeks, I've really been trying to figure out, is it right and responsible for us to say we're not going to include our local pharmacies, A, because we have a relationship with those folks and we're going to see them on the street and we're going to hear from them. We're not hearing from Walgreens corporate, right? We're not hearing from, I suspect we might. We're not hearing from Rite Aid either. If we were in a town where we had a pharmaceutical manufacturer or distributor, I suspect we'd be hearing from them too. And I think it's entirely appropriate that our local pharmacies are going to want to have something to say about this whole suit. But I was really trying to weigh up whether or not we had any grounds to not include, for example, Hotel Pharmacy, based on what we have in this suit. And also, we don't have any evidence that they have failed in their duty. And so I feel that it's a really, really tough decision for us to make. And I hope that Hotel Pharmacy and Brattleboro Pharmacy and other local folks have really done a good job of making sure that opioids have been distributed in a way that's appropriate, that's legal, that's responsible. And I hope that by not naming those pharmacies in this suit, that we're doing the right thing. But I personally don't feel like I don't feel like I could stand up and talk to somebody who owned one of our local pharmacies and say, this is why you have to be in this suit. I don't feel like I have anything other than, we need to take a look at what you did. And I would love if there was a way for us to take a look at what they did and check that it was all, above board. I would love for there to be a way to do that without engaging in a lawsuit. So it's just been something that's been really challenging for me to consider, and I'm hoping that if we do not name our local pharmacies, that will prove to be wise and responsible.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm having a thought of just going down the table and each of us stating our feelings. Is anybody opposed to that? Okay, then I'll go to Liz.
Okay, so this information that we have before us with regard to pharmacies states that at all relevant times, pharmacy defendants have engaged in improper dispensing practices and continue to do so, despite knowing full well that they could take measures to substantially eliminate their complicity in opioid diversion. So what we know from this information is that the national chains engaged in these practices. We don't know that the local pharmacies did. We've taken preliminary measures to see what we could find out about the local pharmacies, and at this time we have nothing to essentially charge them with as defendants. So I'm of the position that we should exclude them at this time, and if evidence should arise, we can always add them to the suit, but I don't want to essentially sue these people without any knowledge or basis for the lawsuit. So that's my position. With regard to the other, the secondary lawsuit, I think we should stick with the one that we have more basic knowledge and a relationship with the attorneys going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. I'm going to open my comments up with a quote, which you'll find on the bottom of page 92 of the suit. I'm going to begin by mispronouncing the first word, I'm sure. Malenkroit received an email from a distributor who had received an overnight shipment of 1,200 bottles of oxycodone and wrote, "Keep them coming. They're flying out of here. It's like people are addicted to these things or something. Oh, wait, people are," end quote. A Malenkroit employee responded, "Just like Doritos, keep eating, we'll make more." I am naturally of the mind that all entities should participate in due diligence, which in my mind in a legal suit is a discovery process, and then be weeded out from there. That's what seems proper to me. However, I am not a black and white person. I live in a very gray world, and I understand that the upfront cost to legal pharmacies of having to be part of that weeding out process is burdensome, and without proof, such as an email like that I just read, I'm uncomfortable doing that. At this time, I would be more comfortable excluding local pharmacies. However, we do and always retain the right that if somebody came up with hard evidence, we retain the right at any time to bring a pharmacy back into a suit, as we do with any of these. And I will be hoping that hard evidence never hits this table and that we don't have to worry about that. I take this very seriously. If there's anybody in this room that doesn't know why I take this seriously, feel free to have a conversation with me offline about things that are 100 times worse than the sentence I just read to you. I also agree with my fellow board members who have spoken so far that I don't see us really benefiting from being in the second lawsuit. A, I'm not sure we could exclude certain defendants in that lawsuit. I think it's more of a blanket thing. And B, we haven't really had any communication. We've had much more communication and quick answers with the suit that's in Bennington, and I think that in a small town where we need to really take care of each other, that we need to stay with somebody that actually wants to communicate with us, and where we can have some say over who's on the defendant list. That's my comments.
It's my turn.
It's your turn.
I was pretty clear last meeting about my position on this. Just to kind of go along with what some other folks were saying, the specific examples, one of which you read, for some of the national chains are pretty appalling, and there's multiple ones in the suit. However, it's interesting to me in the Bennington suit that the Pharmacy Inc., which is a locally owned Bennington and somewhere up north pharmacy, I think it's Vermont owned, they don't go into specifics for that pharmacy. So I don't know why one of those pharmacies was named. Possibly it's the only one that's not a national chain. I'm not sure. But I thought that was curious, and if so, irresponsible, because I don't see, the Brattleboro Selectboard is not an investigation unit. We don't have a special unit that goes out and investigates things. That's a little ridiculous. It's not within our purview. So if we had been presented with some evidence, I think it would be incumbent upon us to name everybody who there was some evidence for. But in this case, I don't think it's the responsible thing to do. It would be seen, unfortunately, as just sort of scooping everybody up. And I think our local pharmacies are doing their due diligence, and I don't have any evidence that they're not. So that's the way I'm leaning. And also towards the newer lawsuit, it's very vague. I think, can you just confirm for us, Bob, was it, it's really not even a fully named suit yet?
That's right. It's a national prescription opioids litigation. Not all of the parties are known or named, and as far as how that global settlement would work, not all of the defendants have agreed to be bound by that type of an arrangement. So I would agree with you, it's very vague. It's also in its very early stages.
Right.
But there's a lot to be negotiated with regard to that.
Right.
One of the benefits of being part of it is that you have, as being part of a group, you have a seat at a negotiation table. But by the same token, if you have your own suit, or along with Bennington and other local municipalities in Vermont, you have a seat at the table with those particular defendants.
Yeah.
So there are advantages both ways. The difficulty has to do with how a case is settled, and in the national group, as I mentioned before, it's 75% have to agree on a settlement. So.
Yeah. And we do, I mean, I can't imagine we don't run a risk of losing a large swath of our target defendants if that were to settle out. And that's something I'm concerned with as well.
That's certainly true, yes.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's basically what I was going to say.
Well, I don't really have a lot to add, but I want to reinforce, actually I have one thing to add, but I want to reinforce a couple of things that were said. I think Daniel's clarification about the national chains is really important. There are specific actions and inactions that are cited in this lawsuit. As for the local pharmacies, there's no evidence of local culpability, and there's really no basis for us to put them through a legal process. I just wanted to, I think that's what everyone has said. I just wanted to be really clear about that. I also want to point out that we've been talking about this for months now, I think. And most of the conversation takes place in executive session because it is a contractual issue, and we need to be able to protect the town from premature knowledge of what we're thinking about until we know what we're going to say about it. And that's why we do it this way and why we have these motions now. But we've heard legal opinions locally and nationally. We've read through hundreds of pages of documents, extensive questioning and conversation and consideration. It's been a very thoughtful process, and I'm really pleased with where we've landed. And I'm ready to move the motions.
Take
I do. Okay. At this time, I'd like to move to the community for comments, hoping that whatever comments you came here with, that you take those and incorporate them with what you've heard the board kind of hinting that they're going to do, and then come and speak in a thoughtful manner at the microphone in the beginning, in the middle of the room. Is there anybody who would like to go first?
Speak for other things.
Okay. Oh, Franz, there we are. Kick it off.
I think you said.
Well, nobody else is going to. Franz Reichsman, District 2. I'm just not quite clear on some of the legal aspects of the case from a broader perspective, which is all I've got on this, really. Would this lawsuit, at least the one in Bennington, or maybe both of them, would that fall under the general category of tort law?
Yes, there are certainly allegations in tort. There are also allegations with regard to fraud and others, but yes, I would, in the broad perspective, look at it as tort law.
And so I think in that part of the case, then, there would have to be a duty on the part of the pharmaceutical companies and distributors that was then breached, and that damages resulted, and that the breach of the duty was the proximate cause of the damages. But the damages have to be to the town, since the town is the plaintiff in this, not to the individuals who suffered harm, but that the town suffered harm, and that those damages would be compensated, well, first that were proximately caused, and then would be compensated in accordance with some formula, I suppose. But it also makes me wonder if there's any contributory negligence on the part of others that might interfere with the finding of negligence on the part of the companies. In particular, I mean, it just strikes me that maybe the pharmaceutical companies could say, hey, we provided the medication, but it's all those other people out there who took them that really were the proximate cause of the problem, not us, that there was an intervening step there. And I wonder, do you have a perspective on, I don't know, how this all falls together, and is it really likely to prevail in the end? I guess that's my question.
That's a big question. I do think there are lessons learned from the tobacco litigation here. Not all of it is a pure negligence model that you have just walked through, as far as the duty, the breach of the duty, the proximate cause, and the damages. But to get to your question with regard to will it ultimately prevail, if the facts as set forth in here with regard to how the large majority of people who are addicts first became addicts through prescription medication, then yes, it's likely that there will be success with regard to a suit. With regard to contributory negligence, I don't necessarily buy that, because if the manufacturers knew that their product would be addictive, and for profit attempted to get that out into the public to as many people as possible, knowing that if people get addicted, they will want more and more, and they will sell more and more. I don't think that that is contributory negligence whatsoever. I think that's taking advantage of citizens who don't know that, they're simply saying, hey, I had an operation and I was prescribed these pills, and then those pills in some instances lead to addiction, and we've seen many of the consequences of that, and how that can affect not only a small town like Brattleboro, but huge cities across the United States. It's interesting, too, in the facts here that the United States is about 5% of the world's population, and we use 80% of, I believe that was one of the statistics, 80% of the prescription opioid medications that are produced around the world. So maybe that's why we have this epidemic. But it's an epidemic that perhaps through a combination of many efforts, some from the medical community, some from state regulation, from lawsuits, you name it. But the idea is to stop or reduce significantly the number of new people who are being, or new addicts, I guess is the way to put it. So if you can reduce the number of pills, then you are theoretically reducing the number who might then become addicts, and then all of the bad things that happen from there. So it's not just the money in this suit. It's damages, it's injunctive relief. It's really trying to stem that flow so that society down the road is a much better place. And also to compensate the towns and cities that are part of these various lawsuits for how they've had to react to the opioid epidemic, whether that's more rescue calls or police-related incidents. That's part of what goes into the damages that you spoke about, Mr. Reichman.
Further public, yes?
Hey, HB Luzito, Brattleboro. I'm finding myself so stuck on the statistic that Daniel shared about the millions of doses that went out. And I guess maybe this isn't the mechanism to find that out, and it sounds as though you all have some more information than we in the public have. I think I'm really stuck on that and hearing that hotel pharmacy is the second most. And I'm curious, maybe it's a journalistic mechanism or some other mechanism that we need to find out more information about that statistic. And not even necessarily that means that they should be named, but I think that statistic to me is very startling. It's a huge amount. It's more than someone else that's going to be cited. And I guess I'm curious if it sounds as though you all have not heard compelling evidence to include them in that suit, and I wonder if anyone is able to share more information about what you have learned that has made you want to exclude. Is that you know what I'm asking? Mm-hmm. Like that to me is very startling, and I'd love to hear more if you all are able to share more information about the specifics of how that's happened that causes you to want to exclude. That'd be great.
Do you mind if I say something? I think for me, while I haven't heard specific evidence that makes me want to exclude, I've tried to sit down and kind of reason my way into why that number might be. And a couple of ideas that I had were that it's the downtown pharmacy, that many of the services that serve people who are struggling from opiate addiction, often who don't have vehicles, are using that pharmacist the most because they can walk to it from where they're staying or maybe where they're camping. They also deliver, and I'm not sure other pharmacies do. I actually don't know, so those were my only two ideas. And outside of that, I was as startled as you are, and it still doesn't sit with me well at this time.
Randy? I think we also heard at some point along the way that hotel pharmacy serves a lot of the institutions, like the retreat hospital and schools and a lot of the other institutions, so they just process a lot more of those pharmacy prescriptions.
And I just want to clarify, I don't think we have any numbers that are not appearing here.
No, we don't.
That I recall.
You can find it on our materials on the website.
There were some pieces of information relating directly to the cases that we're not supposed to share because that's part of the class of the lawsuit. But for me, the numbers, while very interesting, are not an indictment in themselves. Just because hotel pharmacy happens to be successful does not make them guilty of anything. I'm kind of happy to see that they're kind of kicking
They're competing well with the guys, yeah.
But just from supporting local businesses. But it is eye-opening and interesting from that perspective. But again, I don't think it's any kind of indictment.
Can we talk a little bit about what we did do in the background in order to determine how we don't have evidence of wrongdoing?
Mm-hmm.
I guess.
Thought you were going to do
Bob.
that. I was waiting.
So, okay, I'll give what I saw happen,
Okay.
right? So
Sorry.
we were curious about whether or not there had been any police activity related to anything that might have been happening with hotel pharmacy, right? And we looked into that and found...
Staff looked into it.
Well, any.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, this is why I don't feel super confident like
Then you
talking about the
can
details,
punt it.
because I'm like, I know what we wanted to know. I didn't do this stuff. You know?
It was all
Yes,
the local
please.
pharmacies. Right?
So, yeah, we felt there was only a limited amount of information that we could responsibly report on related to potential local evidence of local wrongdoing. And we did the kind of search that we typically do of the databases at the police department, and it showed nothing related to the local pharmacies. You heard Bob speak to the fact that this is a really complicated situation. There's a lot of regulation at the state and federal level, in addition to potential complaints that might be filed around these things. And so we don't feel as though we can responsibly state that there's no evidence to find of some concerns there that would have led this board to a different conclusion. What we believe is, due to the complexity of that, there may be information that comes later. That's why you heard Randy Starr say, she's hoping we never find reasons to bring in other defendants, but maybe there will be other information that comes forward that causes it to be appropriate to name other defendants. And you've heard multiple speakers speak to, at this time, the pharmacies wouldn't be included. So I think we want to be careful there that there's a real danger in the lack of information that we have to lean one way or the other. It neither vindicates nor necessarily begs for a deeper dive. And I think now I'm in the dangerous territory of speaking for the board, but based on the discussions that I have heard around the legal advice that they've been receiving in private, I think that after some real serious soul searching individually and collectively, the place they've arrived at is we should proceed with this. We should not name local pharmacies. There is not a basis on which to name local pharmacies. And if we learn of something disturbing later, we'll have to deal with that.
Are there other questions or comments from the community on this topic? Okay, I'm going to bring it back to this table, and if the board would entertain this, I would like to read one more quote that is important to me.
Sure.
Is it okay? This is on page 116, number 531. The subject pharmacies increased their order over time, in some cases as much as 60% in the space of just 2 years, including, for example, supplying a town of 3,000 with 285,800 orders of oxycodone in a 1-month period. Yet Walgreens corporate officers not only turned a blind eye, but provided pharmacists with incentives through a bonus program that compensated them based on the number of prescriptions filled at that pharmacy. In fact, corporate attorneys at Walgreens suggested, in reviewing the legitimacy of prescriptions coming in from pain clinics, that, quote, if these are legitimate indicators of inappropriate prescriptions, perhaps we should not document our own potential noncompliance, end quote, underscoring Walgreens' attitude that profit outweighed compliance with the CSA or the health of the community. At this time, if there's further comments from the board, we can take that, or if somebody would like to make this motion, we can take
Do we
that as
have-
well. And I have the motion.
I'll do it, if I can read.
Good luck.
I move that we authorize the town attorney and town staff to take actions necessary for the town of Brattleboro to join in the opioids-related litigation filed on behalf of the town of Bennington, styled as MDL 2804, case number 1:17-MD-2804-DAP, with the exception that the lawsuit will not name locally owned pharmacies as defendants at this time.
David has made this motion.
We all have the rest of them.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Save that for chance.
Oh, we have 2 more motions. Who wants the next one?
Yeah, good idea.
And So the next motion is gonna be, well, I don't have it in front of me, but
This
Liz,
one.
if you do, if you could go ahead.
I move to ratify Town Manager Elwell's decision for Town Attorney Fisher to execute a retainer agreement with Sanford Heiser Sharp LLP and the Sakala Law Firm PLLC.
Excellent. Liz has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And the third and final motion related to all of this is whether or not to stay in both lawsuits or to opt out of one. And who would like to make the motion on that?
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
No, you go ahead.
I'll make a motion to opt out of the nationwide class action lawsuit described in the letter dated November 1st, 2019, from Vermont Attorney General T.J. Donovan.
Okay, Tim has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So that opts us out of the big blanket suit and leaves us in the one that is with Bennington, leaving out local pharmacies at this time. Okay, excellent. We now move into new business, and we kick off new business with the financial report for the month of October. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. So the report is pretty routine tonight, as it usually is, especially this early in the fiscal year. So we're 1/3 of the way through the fiscal year, and we have spent approximately 1/3 or less than 1/3 of the allocated expenses in the various areas. So the general fund expenditures, when you prorate the annual or semi-annual payments that have already been made, is at 33.2% of the annual budget. Utilities fund is a little higher based on work that has been ongoing early in the year. There's also some proration in the utilities fund for payments that are made semi-annually, but that one is totaling out at 34.7, not a cause for concern, because we understand the reasons why just slightly over the proportional amount has been expended. And then in the various other areas, the parking fund expenditures are only at 28.7%, and solid waste, as usual, is lagging both on revenues and expenditures below 30%. So the report in all of those operating expense and revenue areas, as well as in the report, monthly report on the outstanding loans and the program income fund and so on, is all very much as you would expect for an October report. We do have one piece of late-breaking news to share. This was put together on November 6th with the close of the month of the books for the month of October. And since that time, we've been advised by the state of Vermont of the amount that the town has received for the first quarter of FY20 in sales tax receipts under the new local option sales tax. And that figure is $202,496.60. So based on being slightly over 200,000 for this first quarter, we're very pleased with that number, but we urge caution about extrapolating it. While it is a higher figure than we would have expected based on the estimate of annual receipts of $630,000, there's still a lot about the system that we don't know. It's still the first payment that we've received. We need to see some history here and continue to work with the state around this for a while before we're going to have a good feel for being able to project future revenue. But nevertheless, in this first instance, we're very pleased with the number that has come in from the state. We would have expected it to be more on the order of $150,000, $160,000.
Jim?
I'm very pleased. I have to say, I am
Go ahead, say
very
it.
pleased, and I will resist the very
Go ahead, say it.
urge. No.
Yeah, resist.
No, I was just going to say to resist the urge to adjust, our budget thinking at all based on these early numbers, because we shouldn't be doing
I
that.
told you so.
I thought it was going to be.
Actually,
However-
we said
So
to
too.
give it back, so there's no adjustment.
It's very good news.
It is
It's
very good news.
$202,000 that this town did not have last year.
And would not have had.
And that's only for the quarter, and I believe it's an underreported quarter because of the weirdnesses of getting everything up and running. I think the real test will be the next 3 months, starting October 1st, including October, November, December. So
It also reflects the internet tax It's now
Right.
collected over. But there is one thing I noticed, and I watch this every month, the prorated numbers, and to look at, to see how the surplus is, and I can't remember a month. I'm sure there must have been some, but I can't remember a month in 6 or 7 years that we didn't have 2 or 3%. After the proration, we weren't
Right.
2 or 3% ahead, because I would multiply that by
Right.
the, and figure out how much of a surplus we're running. And I wonder, were there any particularly large expenses in the last month that would take away that 2 or 3% that we had last month? I
don't
know
have
it's
an
only there monthly, and it could be gone before the end of the year. But
It will be.
It's
It will
generally
be
there.
gone before the end of the year, barring some significant emergency that would, cause extra expenses. What you described is true as we get deeper into the fiscal year. This early in the fiscal year, it's not uncommon to be, bumping on it, if not slightly over it.
It's
But
funny, I don't recall, maybe I wasn't paying as much attention in the early months. I don't recall it
yeah, it's
ever
just
being this close.
Yep. I accept that. My assurance to you is 34.7 versus 33.3, and being this early in the fiscal year is not a cause for concern.
Yeah, no, it's the 33.3 compared to the 33.2. That's where it's usually, like, typically it would be 31.2, and there would be a 2 or 3%. We would have
Oh,
underspending.
so if you're speaking specifically to the
To the
general fund, I
prorated
thought you were
number,
talking
yeah.
about the utilities fund.
No, the prorated.
So the general fund, there are very specific reasons. There has been, by action of the board as well as by action of staff, money expended that was not budgeted, substantial funds. And I'm trying, forgive me for stammering, I'm trying to remember it was the, but then that came back in, so it's not, take that back. I was gonna say the work today. You authorized the work today funds, but then they were returned to the town because that program, the kicking off of that program was delayed. But I do know we have spent money from staff, and I advised you about it, related to particularly the porta potties and other expenses related to some of the conditions in the community through the summer months. There were
that's showing up.
unplanned expenses, so they're showing up as expenditures above and beyond what was predicted for expense. My overarching observation is these are not alarming numbers. If there had been something unusual going on that had caused a figure to be higher that we expected to stay higher throughout the year, we would advise you of that, and we'd be taking steps to stay within budget.
Further questions from the board?
Thanks for that update. Happy update.
Are there members of the community that want to speak at all on what they've heard about tonight's budget or what they've read? Okay. All right, then we will move, you don't need a motion for that, do you?
Nope.
Nope, so we'll move right along to item B, potential settlement of Penny Witherbee versus the town of Brattleboro.
Thank you. I'm going to recommend that the select board authorize settlement of the Penny Witherbee litigation, but first I'd like to read a statement into the record.
Please do.
There was a confidentiality agreement signed by all parties to this litigation that protected everyone involved by ensuring that information disclosed during the discovery process would remain private and confidential unless it was either public information prior to this case or ultimately used during the trial. Voluntary settlement of this case prior to trial means that a significant amount of relevant information will not be released to the public. I would have preferred that this matter proceed all the way to public trial because I believe that the town would have prevailed on the facts. I chose those words carefully, and they are important. The town's attorneys, members of the select board, other named defendants, and I all believe that the town would have prevailed at trial not because of some nuance in the law, but based on a clear and complete understanding of the facts. I can state unequivocally that the town of Brattleboro did not commit any gender-based discrimination against Ms. Witherbee. I acknowledge that issues related to some workplace conduct by some individuals is a more complicated matter. However, it is important to note that the overall atmosphere in the police department is healthy and professional. Instances of inappropriate conduct have been rare. Throughout town government, management has taken corrective action regarding inappropriate conduct brought to our attention, Training has been provided to all employees as a reminder that harassment and offensive conduct will not be tolerated, and there is no evidence that town management or the police command staff ever tolerated any harassment or offensive conduct directed at Ms. Witherbee or anyone else. Despite our confidence that the town would present a strong defense at trial and our preference that the public would be able to judge for itself based upon all the relevant facts, I have concluded, along with the town's attorneys, members of the select board, and the town's insurer, the Property and Casualty Intermunicipal Fund, which is administered by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, that it is in the best interests of all parties to settle this litigation. Here is a summary of the settlement terms. All claims against individually named defendants will be dismissed with prejudice. With prejudice means that they cannot be refiled. The town of Brattleboro and Penny Witherbee will settle the remaining claims as follows. All claims against the town of Brattleboro will be dismissed with prejudice. Penny Witherbee will provide the town of Brattleboro with a general release. VLCT Passive will pay Ms. Witherbee $35,000. VLCT Passive will pay Ms. Witherbee's attorney $3,400. And VLCT Passive will pay the mediation fee and certain deposition fees from this litigation. I will now read a resolution that was prepared by the town's attorneys, and I recommend that the select board adopt this resolution to approve the settlement of this matter in the manner I have just described. Resolution of the select board of the town of Brattleboro, Vermont. The undersigned, being the members of the select board of the town of Brattleboro, a municipal corporation duly created and validly existing under and pursuant to the laws of the state of Vermont, hereby resolve as follows. Resolved that the town authorizes and ratifies the settlement of a claim by Penny Witherbee in the matter Penny Witherbee versus Town of Brattleboro, docket number 2:18-CV-00113-CR paren D period VT period end parentheses semicolon, and resolved that the town admits no liability and enters into the settlement for the sole purpose of avoiding protracted litigation and authorizes the payment of settlement funds by VLCT Passive Incorporated pursuant to the settlement agreement and general release executed by Penny Witherbee. And resolved that the town hereby authorizes town manager Peter Elwell to execute on behalf of the town any and all necessary and incidental documents required in connection with the above described settlement agreement. In witness whereof, the undersigned have executed this resolution this 19th day of November, 2019.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Liz?
I have a few things to say. It was my duty to represent the select board and participate in negotiations for the Witherbee lawsuit. I find that the town of Brattleboro was more than fair to Ms. Witherbee. This relatively low settlement payment reflects that fairness and the lack of culpability by both the town and the police department. I also note that this settlement dismisses individual parties. This settlement reflects the town's good judgment to bring this matter to a close without expending further time and resources, and I move that the select board approve this settlement.
Thank you very much, Liz. There's really no comments that can be made because still has to stay pretty confidential outside of what's been read. Is that true?
Yes, so the
right.
reason that I took the unusual step of reading a carefully prepared written statement instead of just summarizing extemporaneously is because of the confidentiality agreement related to this matter, and we need to be careful to stay within the four walls of that.
Excellent. That's why I will not be coming for questions. And at this time, Liz has made the motion. Board feels comfortable with the said motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Where's my agenda? All right, so we now move to item C under new business, which is application for an FY21 VTrans Better Roads Grant from the Department of Public Works. Love this grant. Never give us enough.
Good evening, Steve Barrett, Director of Public Works. And tonight, Highway Utilities Superintendent Dan Tyler is going to make a recommendation for a grant from Better Back Roads.
So this is the annual Better Roads Grant. It's VTrans in conjunction with A&R, and they're really focusing on the municipal general roads permit and the effort to complete that and make recommended repairs. It's broke down into 4 sections. Section A focuses on the inventory. We've completed about half of our gravel road inventory. We have the second half of the gravel road inventory, and then we have to inventory all our outfalls from any drainage structures in town. So there's $8,000 maximum grant amount available for that, and we're hoping to continue with the intern program that we started last year to complete that inventory process. That needs to be completed by December 2020. So either way, we need to complete that. Section B is for previously identified problems. So the maximum grant amount is $20,000. We picked a section on Bonnievale Road that was identified last year in the inventory to have some erosion problems. That section will cost about $28,000 to repair, so we're hoping we can use that if awarded. The next 2 are for bigger projects. Section C is stream bank related problems. We have a retaining wall on a large culvert on Ames Hill Road that erosion has caused the wall to topple. We're hoping that we can at least get some engineering done on that and determine a fix for that, and depending on what that is, maybe do the repair as well. And section D is for large culverts or structures over 36 inches. There's a small bridge on Akeley Road that's really narrow, in poor condition, and we're hoping that we can get some money to do some engineering on that and maybe some preliminary work. So it's a lot of money if it comes through.
Yeah, it'd be good. Very good. Steve, do you have anything to add?
I don't.
All right, very complete report. Members of the board have questions or comments?
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Good
Yeah.
luck.
Yeah. Members of the community have questions or comments on the application for this grant? Okay, then I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve an application in the amount of $128,000 for an FY21 Better Roads Grant from the Vermont Agency of Transportation.
Excellent. David has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Thanks, Dan. Okay, so now we move on to item D under new business, which is Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategies, better known as SeVEDS. It's an update and a request for FY21 funding. This happens every year. And we're pleased to have you join us if you want to come over to the table. I'm missing one of our cards. I was like,
I think it went to the bathroom.
Nailed right at the right moment.
just hand them out really slow.
Nice picture, that one. Nice picture.
We can certainly wait if you like and peruse our material, whatever you're.
Yeah, we can invert our plan, which was to have, hi. We're here from I'm Jen Stromson, I'm Director of Programs at Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, joined by Adam Grenold, our Executive Director. So he's going to introduce us and make some comments, and then turn it over to Sarah for a little program talk.
Okay, great.
Oh my gosh.
Thanks for the introductions. So it's great to be here tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak about what's really been a very impactful, busy year. So this past year, almost a year ago, we helped some projects here with the Long Falls Paperboard. Excuse me. And since that time, we've seen just about $6 million worth of payroll come into the region. Later in the spring, we completed the first two-county comprehensive economic development strategy. We also celebrated that with the Southern Vermont Economic Development Summit. A lot of folks here were at that, bringing together about 250 people from across Southern Vermont to help plan the future of our economy. And then we, of course, also worked together on the Exit 1 Industrial Park wastewater and water improvements. And then lastly, we've started working on the Long Falls Paperboard biomass cogeneration project. So that was a $1 million grant that comes into the region to support the development of that project. So in the last 6 months, our organization has helped bring in about $2 million worth of outside capital. And what's a little different than in years past is that capital is not for our own organization, but instead it's building capacity in others to grow the region. So we're really looking to continue that pattern. We're leveraging some of the dollars that the municipalities take to bring more dollars into the region, and then putting those out into other projects and organizations across the region. So it's a bit of a change in our approach and the way we're doing things, and we're excited to talk about that. Tonight we also, of course, have another topic tonight to talk about, which is the report that was requested of us at last year's Brattleboro town meeting, representative town meeting. So we've got that to go over. Jennifer Thompson, who is the Director of Programs, but also our Chief Data Person at the BDCC, is here to help talk about that report. But before that, I want to turn it over to Sarah, who's going to just give a real brief background on some of the work that she's been doing, as well as some of our colleagues. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Lang. I work at the BDCC. At the current moment, I wear the talent specialist hat. So what sort of falls under that realm is some of the recruitment things that we've been doing, the internship program that we run, as well as the young professionals group. So I'm sure everyone has at least heard of the young professionals group, but providing workshops, trainings, events for people 20-something to 40-something. At least once a month. Actually, this month we're doing 3 events. I don't know how that happens, but it does. So this week we're hosting our 4th annual sort of first-time homebuyer informational session. So we have Wyndham Windsor, Housing Trust, and a mortgage lender and a realtor come together to talk with young professionals who have yet to buy their first home. It's sort of a precursor to the first-time home buyer class that you can take through Wyndham Windsor. And that's had a pretty great turnout year after year. Last year we did it in Putney, and we had, I think, 16 young professionals show up. And we'll see how many show up this year. We're doing it in Bellows Falls this year to sort of speak to our regional mission, and we've been marketing it to a lot of the organizations and employers up there to sort of give to their younger employees, and hopefully they'll come out after work. We are also doing a homecoming event on the eve before Thanksgiving. This was an idea that was heard when Adam and our NRT were at a national conference. Sort of this idea of family and friends that typically come home for the holiday, and wouldn't that be a great group of people to capture, to maybe have them consider making this their hometown again. So we're going to be doing that here in town. Also, one thing that I work on is the Stay to Stay program, which is a statewide program. It has different locations throughout the state, and we've been doing it for 2 years now here in Brattleboro, and that is trying to recruit people who are interested in moving to the area, giving them sort of making those connections with community members as well as employers. And then starting in January, I will be going back to the project I was managing, which is the Southern Vermont Economy Project. We got refunded through the USDA Rural Development to do another 2 years of capacity building around economic and workforce development. And SVEP 2.0 will be more project focused, so really moving the needle on getting projects closer to completion. And the town of Brattleboro is one of the grant partners in that, so we really look forward to providing workshops and trainings to help in some of those town projects. I think that's it.
So I don't know if you want to, how you want to do this with the report that we submitted. If you want to ask questions, we're happy to talk about it. The annual report that Sarah was just handing out. Again, we're doing about 50 to 55 select board meetings per year around Wyndham region. We're always listening, really trying to understand what the communities are looking for. We heard from some communities that they didn't want to see a lot of the sort of glossy stuff, so we've reduced our printing by half this year.
Awesome.
The color version is on our website, but we were really happy to be handing those out tonight. So that's this past year, and then of course the separate report is the report that was requested of us at town meeting.
Great. What's the board's pleasure?
I got questions.
I got comments.
I got both.
All right, fight it out. Who's going first?
Go ahead, Daniel.
I got so many. I'll try and pick
Sorry.
the top three. Top three.
I had no
Okay.
idea.
Well, actually, the first question is a comment. So thank you for making this, and please send these materials in advance. I can't listen to your presentation and read this at the same time. You've obviously put a lot of work into it, and it's hard for me to digest both what you're saying and this at the same time.
Great, thank you.
I want to talk about wages. Talked about wages last week, hoping to continue talking about wages. I noticed in the letter that you wrote, you talked about how your work is to realize regional goals like improving wages and opportunities for residents. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about how you are working on improving wages.
Sure, happy to do that. So in our first regional SeVEDS, which was 5 years ago, we picked a few target areas for the focus on. And the whole concept behind this was, let's not write a report of things that we wish we had and try to get them to come here. It was, let's invest in what we have. So it was precision manufacturing, it was optics, it was value-added food manufacturing at large. And in your report that we've handed out in advance, not tonight, you'll find one source that I think really speaks to some of the effectiveness of this. So in Brattleboro, in the manufacturing supersector, in 2009, there was 15 manufacturing establishments, and in 2018, there are 46. When you compare that to Vermont, you see, I'm looking at here, well, and let me go, it's percent growth, sorry.
Can you give us a
There's
page number?
15%, the growth was 15%.
13?
Page 12 or 13
Page
are we on?
11.
Okay, close.
2 ahead.
So, and then when you compare that to the employment and average wage, you can see that in comparison from Brattleboro to Vermont, Brattleboro saw an increase from 2009 to 2018 of 33.4%, and in Vermont there was a decline of 4.4%. And then in the average wages, we see from 2009 to 2018 in Brattleboro an increase of 14.4% in those wages.
So that's one answer to the wage,
Sure.
to how we try to focus on wage growth. It's trying to focus on companies or sectors where better wages can be provided. Another example of the way that we invest in wage growth is directly through investing in workforce. So, for instance, we are kind of the connector to the region for the Vermont training program. So we have both Adam and another staffer who spend a lot of time working with employers to identify ways in which they can upskill existing incumbent employees, and then bringing in the state expert, John Young, who's fabulous, to work with that company to develop a training program to help people become more skilled at their job, which is really the best pathway to better wages for most workers. We also sometimes do very specific programs. We just put on a hospitality training. We work to get some funding from the state. So again, same thing that was sort of put on for the public at large. A lot of, it was over in the Deerfield Valley. And the idea is for folks working in the hospitality sector to just give them, there's a supervision boot camp, as well as sort of a customer service and hospitality piece of it. So give folks the skills to move up in their careers and earn better wages at the jobs we have here.
Great, thank you. Can I ask one more question? It's not about wages. It's actually it's more top level. So I've been a town meeting member the last couple of years, and when this article comes up, there's often a lot of discussion, and sometimes it feels like there's a lot of confusion about what BDCC is and what SeVEDS is. And we're being asked to fund SeVEDS, correct?
Correct.
So first of all, could you differentiate between those two things? And then could you speak as directly as you can to like how our money gets used within SeVEDS?
Yes. So SeVEDS is a 501c3. It is an affiliate entity to the BDCC, which is a 501c6. SeVEDS has its own board, its own budget, but it has no employees. So instead, it contracts with the BDCC to implement its strategic priorities. We then take those strategic priorities, and the staff goes out and implements. So they can, for instance, several years ago, it said workforce. Please help grow our workforce, train our workforce, upskill our workforce. So we went out and found resources to do that. Specifically, the municipal funding goes to direct pay for some of the individuals, but we don't just do that, we actually leverage it 2, 3, or more times by taking those municipal funds and applying for other state or federal grants that help support that program.
So the
And foundation.
SeVEDS pay, so SeVEDS has no employees, so the pay goes to BDCC
Correct.
staff who work under the auspice of SeVEDS, but not.
Yes.
Okay, all right,
So SeVEDS creates strategic priorities
okay.
and asks the other organization, the BDCC, to implement those and to go find the resources to do it.
Another way that I'd like to explain it to people is if you look at, SeVEDS is like our R&D. You know, we do planning and research and strategic development, and it is the Long Falls project, the biomass project. That is being, project managed by BDCC and the staff paid by and governed by BDCC, whatnot. But we did that because of the Ecovation Hub. We did that because of a SeVEDS research and planning thing. We did that because of taking a long, hard look for a few years at the forest economy and value-added wood, and how we get better wages and better stewardship and better outcomes in this economy, based on the natural resource assets. And so that's a SeVEDS-driven thing. If you look at us compared to the other 11 regional development corporations that don't have a SeVEDS, we are operating, looking forward in workforce, strategically planning, choosing very special projects to try to move the dial on wages or, small business growth in a way that those other ones aren't. So it's like our special sauce.
Does SeVEDS ever ask any other organizations outside of BD to do the legwork? Or is it always, that's a specific contract and it's always that way?
For the contract, it's an annual contract, they come to our board and say, please implement this. It is not sourced that elsewhere, no.
I'm just asking because I'm finally starting to figure it out. So now I'm starting to have different questions than I usually do.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
I forgot what page I was going to refer to, so.
Forgot which page you're on?
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to go first?
Okay,
Oh.
yeah. Mine are kind of macro, I don't know, well, a couple of specific things, but one is, thank you for this. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't really have a concept. I think it was Spoonagave who, and I think Spoonagave also was the person who pushed very hard for us to do long-term financial planning. I think he deserves credit for the things that he helps make happen. And this is, I'm sure this information is out there and available, but I don't think any of us, and certainly the town, could apply the resources to get this information. I think that It's going to prove really helpful over the long term. I may ask in a couple of years to go from 16 to 20, and how we're doing in the last, since this ended. When I assume data is available up to 14 or 15. But
It is lagging.
yeah.
It depends on the source, yeah.
So thank you. I think this is going to be really valuable. I assume it's on your website.
It is.
I wonder, because we also post it on ours as a, not necessarily under our documents, but someplace like, the Brattleboro Economic Update, November 2019, so people can just go and find it pretty easily. Because it's really an astonishing amount of information, and it's really revealing of a lot of the patterns and trends and things that, particularly as a school board member, that I see in terms of the relationship with towns and why people see things the way they do and vote the way they do. So thank you. This is really valuable. I think over time it'll be even more valuable as we figure out how to use it. The other thing is, Sarah, and the things that you mentioned, just an encouragement. You talked about recruiting and internship and the activities of young professionals. And it would be, sort of general statements. I think it'd be really helpful to have some numbers associated with that. How many people moved here? How many people found jobs? How many interns were, continuing those careers? To sort of follow up qualitative information to go with that. And then the other comment is that I'm not sure. It may be because there's something about the relationship between BDCC, SeVEDS, and SeVEDS. But at the end of the report, the only thing I've really had time to notice is at the end, the 2019 5 objectives are outlined. But as I look at the report, it doesn't really specifically address any. I mean, one of them is increased population. I mean, how'd that go? And improved physical infrastructure. What happened? And your report doesn't seem to specifically address. Generally, it does, and there are lots of things like this growth and stuff. But to have your report more correspond with the objectives, I think.
So these objectives
Might
are
consider that.
for the next 5 years? And then, so,
I mean, now, like this year,
Yeah,
going forward,
starting
but
this year,
we're sort of
24.
reporting,
yeah, so we'll be reporting on this.
We're in a
next
crossover year.
Thank you.
I just have a kind of a novice question on page 5. I'm looking at the wage comparison. Is this, at the top chart, is this telling me that Springfield has better wages? What is this telling me? Like, I'm looking at Springfield, whose bars sticks out longer than Brattleboro, and I'm asking, what is that telling me on page 5?
Here, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's telling you sort of what first of all, these are wages, so it's not household income, so it's the wages paid. So it's basically telling you that the job shed, that the jobs in Springfield are paying better wages. Or worse. I don't have my glasses on, which is a real mistake, but whatever the number is.
I think you were right the first time. That's how I read it.
Brattleboro is 44 versus Springfield
Yeah,
is
47. And so, and that can just be simply due to the mix. Brattleboro may have more retail jobs and more medical jobs that are like at the lower end of the pay spectrum, as opposed to in Springfield, you may just have a higher proportion of like manufacturing jobs. So that's just about the industry mix in that place. It doesn't reflect the household. So household income would be sort of a measure of how well the people who live there are doing.
Okay.
Many of them going out to earn their wages or other sources of income.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a novice thing. It's really hard to think about these things. You always have to sort of look at it from both perspectives. And then there's also this is the kind of data this that we can get sort of only in a 6-month lag. It's really good. Unfortunately, then we're looking at the household income tends to be census data, and that's very much sampled in rural areas, and we're really far out from the census. So that's I included a lot of that in the report, but I don't love it. I'm really looking forward to the census to have better information for you. So.
Well, I appreciate this data. I'm taking the report back home again
Yeah, I
because
already took mine out of the binder already.
I don't feel like, because I feel like I wanted to hear your words and then take it back home and reread it to see what other information I wanted. This is good.
Yeah, I love the data. I didn't ask for it, but
I always love
double
data.
win there. Yeah.
Well, in being vague, you got more, so that was good.
One thing that fascinates me is population percent
That's what I was
changes
just looking at.
of towns, and I noticed
Yeah.
that
We're looking at page 8.
You're thinking, yeah, 7 and 8, you're thinking the estimated today for Brattleboro has declined slightly, by about a little over 500 people, I guess, or something like that. But the surrounding areas, quite a few of them have gone up a tick. So I just trying to get I'm always trying to look for, well, are people fleeing Brattleboro town for one or more various reasons and still remain working in Brattleboro town?
Cannibalizing data.
And I'm sure you could point me towards it, but I don't think you include New Hampshire and Cheshire County and Massachusetts.
No, because I completely lifted this data, although with attribution, from the Vermont Department of Health. They do a great job of doing visualizations.
Yeah.
And they only do them for the state of Vermont, sadly.
But you do have a chart in here that you lifted from someone, that you, where you
Public
include.
information. It's not like it's-
Absolutely, no.
Exactly.
And I'm also trying to point you to these resources because actually, as you say, it's hard to learn how to find this stuff, and I think people should get familiar with some of these, like the Vermont Department of Health. They just do a great job of doing some sort of baseline demographics. So,
We
yeah.
complain a lot about how the state requires us to gather all this data and report stuff, but
Get it back.
if you use it, it's kind of valuable.
And the living and the working data on page 6, source Wyndham Regional Commission, is also very useful in that manner, and that does include New Hampshire and Franklin County in Massachusetts. Just one little tiny suggestion, if you did make this up, and maybe you didn't, but to expand your palette, because it's really hard to read the, do you agree with that?
No, I didn't. This is their palette. It also
Yeah,
just
okay.
wouldn't be my color choice.
No.
No, it's just, it's a strange color choice, but on top of that, it's really hard to tell the
Well,
pluses.
What's it called when your
It's
colors are
autumnal.
all
Colorblind.
Doesn't fit with my scheme at all.
It's a fashion thing. Liz, help me with this. What's it
Almost
called when your
something.
colors all kind of go together pretty well?
Matchy matchy.
There you have it.
Thank you, Daniel.
Matchy it is.
So one of the
We
things
talked about
I
that.
think it's autumnal, but
it is autumnal.
Yeah.
I do want to make it just a point. We tried really hard not to include a lot of commentary, not a lot of editorializing. There's a little bit of hinting and nudging, but there are a lot of things that interrelate. And so I think you mentioned something about sort of what's happening in the surrounding towns and some of those trends. And I want you to ask all the questions, and maybe we can answer them in the future, or maybe we can just point you to some data about what might be drivers of those things, and those might be housing supply, those might, and those things obviously relate to school populations and school choice, and so there's a lot of stuff that we weren't trying to pretend to be able to answer, the causation, or much less make forecasts based on this, but we're just trying to, drop in some nuggets that'll help you have an informed discussion about these things.
Great.
Just one other thing, it's not a surprise at all. On page 19 at the top, it shows the trend in household income from 2000 to 2017 in terms of people with 200,000 more, and then people in the middle, and then people at low income. And as with the rest of the nation, the number of people with more income is increasing, and the number of people with, anyway. So interesting to see that pattern is here as well.
Liz, sorry.
hello. I have a bunch of questions. First, just out of curiosity, is there a similar entity in Bennington County that you work with?
There's
And what's the
the
name of that entity?
Bennington County Industrial Corporation. It's our sister entity there.
What is your working relationship with the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance?
It's weekly, probably, I'd say, but strong. We do a lot of different programs and projects and initiatives. Stay to Stay is a great example. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, so Stay to Stay is a collaboration between the downtown organization, the chamber, and us. So the three of us partner on sort of sharing the responsibilities of what it entails to run those programs, as well as sort of the contact and the continual reminder to those people who had visited, hey, where are you at? Have you moved here yet?
And it's my understanding that the state marketing funds for Southern Vermont or for this area go to your organization and not to the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance? Is that true?
We don't get
We
state
don't
marketing
get-
funds.
You don't get state money?
We do not.
Well, no, we do get state money. We do not get state marketing dollars. The money that we get from the state is for the Regional Development Corporation, so all regional development corporations get the same funding. But we don't get any specific funding for marketing.
So there's regional development corporations across the state, just like there's Wyndham Regional Commission.
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah, there's, yes.
Yep, and sometimes they are co-joined, as in Bennington, it's actually, the industrial corporation is really, sits inside of the equivalent to Wyndham Regional, VTrans.
And how many staff members do you have?
12 currently.
And will you have the same population ratio of funding requests for other towns that you do for Brattleboro?
Yep.
We do, yes, we request
Per town.
$3 per capita from all communities.
And lastly, I'm just not ready at this point to vote on the request for funding, and I would hope that we would delay that.
I don't think we usually vote, we just take information.
We usually
Does that
kick
seem
it
correct?
around a little bit, discuss it, but
I think it's
there's no,
perfectly fine.
I don't think there's anything compelling us.
I'm happy to kick
Town
that
meeting
around.
votes on it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'd
thank
like
you.
to- Oh, I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, I had a question, I forgot.
Darn it.
I should have written it down.
Throw it to the audience.
I'm never gonna remember it now. Just
To
not
kill
how-
time, I'll just say, we're a regional agency, and we also collaborate across southern Vermont because that's sort of our strategic planning unit, is the zone. So our relationship with the Brattleboro Chamber is, we also have the Great Falls Chamber and the Deerfield Valley Chamber and the Shires Chamber. So we really work with a lot of different entities in different ways, and that is, one of the challenges. A lot of our work is centered in Brattleboro, just historically. Those are the business relationships, and we've done a lot here. But we really are, our mandate is to serve the entire region, and in many instances, all of southern Vermont, or some instances specifically.
I remembered my question. Since this was a town meeting request, what's the best, I'm thinking about the reps and how, once it comes to be town meeting time, there's gonna be lots and lots of information, and I'm really wanting, for one thing, I'd like to put the onus on all of us who are town meeting reps to go to your website where this is linked and to read it. And on top of that, I have a question. Is it legal within open meeting laws for this to be sent out to the reps?
Sure.
It has been.
I don't-
Provision of information, absolutely.
You say it has been?
The annual report has been in the past.
But
Not
this one-
This is new.
How do you feel about that? Because my concern is that this is a lot of information. I've already read it twice. I need to read it some more because it's interesting. And then I just want to make sure that everybody has their chance to really eat into it. And I just wonder how you feel about getting it out to the reps. I don't know. You're probably part of the email group. Are you? Any of you?
You
For the
can
reps,
print out.
No?
You can provide
Yeah,
a PDF of it to us, and we'll make sure that it gets out.
Yeah, I mean, the more people that have, this is information, information makes informed decisions, and that's a great thing.
And
Yeah,
we'll
'cause
also
there's a
post it on
lot.
the
Yeah.
town's website.
Great. That was my question. Dissemination of information.
Does anybody, would anybody like to frame the conversation around funding? Remind people, because this is not the first time I've come across this. There's a request before us, but I thought maybe some historic framing might be good for everyone watching.
Go for it.
Oh, I could do it. I was
halfway
actually
there.
trying to cue our town manager to.
Oh,
frame it
well,
a
if you'd
bit.
rather.
And I'm happy to do it too.
No, that's fine. So traditionally, it doesn't have to happen this way, but traditionally, as you probably know, this is funded, Brattleboro funds it through our program income, which is a pot of money that we're lucky enough to steward, which is specifically intended for economic development and/or housing. So this is entirely appropriate, when we make our decision on how to budget things, it's entirely appropriate, in my opinion, to use this pot of funds. So for those of you watching out there, this is not money that comes directly from the town budget and tax money. That originated nationally.
It's federal money.
It's
Federal
federal
money.
money. So Just to make
Yeah.
that clear, I like to make sure everybody
it's good.
understands that.
But the thing that we have to decide is, do we want to do our own economic development funding with that money? And what portion of that
Yep.
should go to this group and other groups in terms of economic development? So that's what we need to weigh.
Sure.
And the thing that, you know, I just have a problem with both this group and the Wyndham Regional Commission with the per capita funding, because it's, you know, as a hub town, I always think that we are disadvantaged with that formula over the support that other towns get. Is not proportional really to the to our population. But nevertheless, we are asked to fund it based on our population.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely legitimate to understand that Brattleboro does our own economic development programs. We do tax stabilization, we do direct loans, we do economic incentives, direct incentives to businesses that come before us. So we're lucky in that way. So I think every year we do this sort of dance where there's a request, and you have to request something to get something. So I just wanted to sort of frame that and let everybody know who's watching what we weigh back and forth. But I, for one, appreciate a lot of what you do, and you do a lot of work in the background, like the Long Falls paperboard work, that sometimes, well, hopefully when it goes well, we hear about it because you do a nice press release. But I'm sure there's other things people haven't heard about that we also appreciate.
Yeah, just real quick supplemental piece. So the BDCC team is certainly aware of this. Every member of the select board is aware of it, and many people in the community. But just to, as part of this summary that sets the table for the discussion you're going to have further on in our budget process, the other thing that has been true, in addition to funding this from program income, which makes us somewhat different from some of the other towns, the other thing that has happened is, as a result of the various ways, as you mentioned, that Brattleboro invests directly in economic development activities, it's now been several years in a row, I think it's 3 and it might be 4, that the recommendation from the select board and the decision at town meeting has been to fund $2 per person, or rounded off from that, rather than the $3 that is requested. And the $3 is the standard request to all communities that are served by SeVEDS. That's not a recommendation one way or the other for how much funding you might choose to provide this year. I do suggest that whatever number you might come up with, that it would come from program income. I agree that's the right place for this to be funded. And you'll have a conversation on another night whether you are of like mind with prior select boards or whether you see it differently.
Just a couple of questions. Well, one, just an observation that the town meeting will decide whether it's $3 or $2 or how much. Yeah, we'll have that whole conversation all over again with another 100 and some people. But can you? I don't imagine you can probably do this off the top of your head. But what Liz mentioned about being a hub town and you know, the equity or inequity of the funding structure. It just struck me, does most of the work that you do, or maybe overwhelming proportion of the work, not two-county work, but in terms of Wyndham County, it seems like most of it happens in Brattleboro. Like most of your efforts and the work that you do, and I mean, there's schools everywhere, I see it, but the biggest high school's here if you're doing things with kids, and the workplaces are here, the big industries are here, and the industrial park is here, and the sewage plant is here. You know, all the infrastructure stuff is here, and it just strikes me that probably we get our money's worth out of it.
Yeah, I would, and every community has to determine what value it sees from this relationship, and I think everyone manages that conversation in different ways. In some communities, it's select board, some communities, it's the floor. But really, you know, and that's really what we're here to do, is make sure that whatever governing body gets that conversation and has those conversations about what can really drive the economy. Last year, 74% of Wyndham County residents supported funding SeVEDS at municipal requests. So it's a good swath of the people. When you think about where does 74% live, they live in some of the denser areas. But absolutely, some of our smaller communities are some of our strongest supporters because they recognize that they can't do it alone. No one's coming to rescue us. Every community does not have the resources necessary to do the kind of work we do. I would say that Brattleboro at $3 per capita is getting more than its investment back, as with every community. So I think really it's just determining that value. And I agree that I think a lot of that activity happens here because of the number of jobs that are here. We're really driven by chasing the jobs and growing jobs.
Other members?
Yeah, something occurred to me just now. So I was thinking about like SeVEDS and not having staff and how BDCC are the staff and SeVEDS is some other entity. And I was curious, like, how do people get involved with SeVEDS? So there's a list of board members here, and presumably they were recruited somehow. How do you do that?
Great question. So we are out in communities every week talking about this. So that's how a lot of people come to our work. SeVEDS is made up of 16 board members representing 13 different communities in the Wyndham region. So it's a grassroots effort. It's been built that way from day one. And it's really just trying to work with the members of all the different communities, large and small, who are concerned about the future, their children's future. They like the kind of work that SeVEDS does, which is looking over the horizon. It's building the strategies, and then they hand those strategies off to us to implement at BDCC. So if anyone is interested, right on our website.
Be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, we've got communities, we've got work. There's lots of different opportunities to get engaged, and it really, every person brings a different perspective, and that's critical for the work we do.
Yep. Thank you.
Are there members of the community that would like to make comment or ask questions at this time? Ricky?
Hi, I'm Ricky Rosati, District 2, Brattleboro, and I went to the Career Expo locally here, and I just was really grateful to get that exposure to SeVEDS and become a member online and go to some of the follow-up meetings afterwards, and I just really appreciate them as an asset. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky.
Hey, HB Luzito, District 2. I'd love to say District 2. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to look at the report that you all sent. I know that's something town meeting folks have really been asking for. Two questions. Well, one. So I hear a lot about manufacturing, and it seems like it's very focused on manufacturing. And so I'm involved in the nonprofit sector. We have very many nonprofits here in Windham County. Very good resource for us has been Marlboro Grad Center, and I'm curious, that's going to be a big loss for us, both in terms of information and in terms of resources, and I'm curious how much of your work also is focused on the nonprofit sector here and that as a workforce development thing in addition to manufacturing. And then my other question is, from my skim of this document, which thank you for bringing this, my understanding is that the municipal funds have mostly gone to the Pipelines and Pathways program. Is that an accurate understanding, and is that the plan for the year coming, or have I missed a whole bunch?
It goes to workforce, and so the P3 program is part of the workforce. So we went out and raised from philanthropic and other sources about $300,000. We were only able to do that by saying that we were raising money from municipalities. So we leveraged the municipal funds for some of that philanthropic, and that P3 program is a program that's being implemented in all 4 Windham County high schools. It's a formerly licensed educator who's doing that. So workforce, but specifically some P3.
So it really helps pay for it's those matching funds when we go to the state or we go to a federal or private funder. So it pays for part of the internship program staffing. It pays for some of our general workforce staffing that makes the expo possible. That takes frankly, this year we mostly carried it because our partners weren't really able to be a part of that. And so the hospitality training, it's really paid for a lot of the staff capacity, the training, the dollars that came in really went to the training itself. We put the capacity forward to make that happen. So it is along a lot of things. As far as the nonprofit thing, we talk about manufacturing because in some ways it's the place where we can show you the data. You know, folks are like, if you're doing this work, what are the outcomes? And it's hard to point to outcomes in some sectors, not because the work isn't worthwhile and not because it isn't hopefully, you know, having some effect and sometimes definitely having effect, but it's also because we historically have worked a lot with manufacturers and done some really big projects with them. So when people want to see impact data, that is an important place for us to go. We have always worked with a lot of nonprofits. It ends up being an area that, because that's actually what's my background, when we're doing business development work, if it's a nonprofit, sometimes I get pulled into that. We've had a lot of tenants who have been nonprofits that everyone knows and loves, you know, from Wyndham Grows to NECA, that grew up with us and grew out of BDCC through a combination of real estate help and kind of developmental help. So we and every single day we partner with nonprofits. I mean, hundreds of nonprofits that really make it possible to get things done, that do a lot of this work, frankly.
And we'll be participating in just today with the state in partnership with some of the support with Marble College. So
Yes.
we'll be deeply engaged in that.
Just a big loss.
Other questions from the community? Yeah. Please come forward and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Witherbee. I'm a resident of Brattleboro. I just kind of wanted to say thank you to the BTCC when I just recently moved here, and that was sort of like a staple for me to move. It's like they actually went out of their way and like not their normal programming, was like sat down with me, hey, these are the different avenues that you can like find jobs, and this is how you can prepare, and then followed up with emails. So and it's really appreciated, and then later connected with the Southern Vermont Young Professionals group and made some friends there. So I just wanted to sort of express my gratitude publicly for the work that you do.
That's great firsthand feedback. Thank you for that. Thanks for doing that here.
Is that a plant?
No. It's really sweet to take the time to be here to say that. I was really surprised to see.
It's very nice.
Thank you.
It's more than sweet to sit here all night.
Yeah, not sweet. That doesn't really cut it.
No. Okay, further questions or comments from the community? Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to include this in the budget process. You're going to get some information out. We're going to get some information out, and we'll be seeing each other again.
Great.
Thanks. Okay, at this time in the meeting, I am going to bring us into a break before we head into capital discussions. Great, my clock is off. Let's say that I will gavel us back in at 8:17. Okay, thank you for entertaining that break. It's good for our brains and bodies and interpreters and all of those things. So at this point, we are moving to item E under new business, and that is the FY21 proposed budget, and tonight's topics are capital projects and capital equipment. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you. So first, as we've been doing each night, I'd like to direct the public's attention, if you're watching at home or if you have a laptop here in the room and you want to follow along, you go to brattleboro.org. On the home page, over on the right-hand side, is the FY21 proposed budget. You click on that and it opens up a page that has several different documents related to the budget. We're reviewing different pieces of the budget on different nights. Tonight being the capital requests, there's actually 3 separate links, so we'll pause as we go through and look at each one separately so that the public can follow along. And the first one is going to be FY21 capital request. We may, if the board or the public has questions about specific items, we may go deeper into the capital project plan and the capital equipment plan. But for right now, we're going to be in the capital project request. I'm sorry, the capital request, which has both the projects and vehicles and equipment listed on it. And I'll just summarize what's in this request and a little bit about the broader context in which it's brought forward. And then the department heads from the various departments that have either a project or a vehicle request on this list are here, and we can take as deep a dive as you'd like into any of these items as we go forward. So the first item on the FY21 capital project request list is the second phase of replacing the windows at the children's room at the library. And I'll say second and final. So we mentioned last year when we asked for $25,000 that this would be a 2-year project. It was funded for 25 last year. We're asking that it be funded the additional 25 to finish the job this year. That is a safety issue in addition to being just a necessary generational replacement.
Excuse me. Is it also a sustainability item?
It does improve. Folks who do energy audits will tell you that windows are sort of the least valuable way to improve a building.
You don't have to tell me.
But yet, we are replacing 50-year-old windows with modern technology, double pane, maybe triple pane, and I don't know the detail on that. Maybe Star does. So it's, yes, we are definitely putting in a modern, energy-efficient window, but windows are still places that bleed heat in the Vermont winter.
Unless they have window quilts.
Well, that's
Well, unless they have proper weather stripping.
Oh, that.
and all other.
It's too far.
So we're going to go through this list and then come back, right?
Thank you, Daniel.
I don't know.
You said that so much better than that. I was really searching for the words. So the next 2 items are recurring annual items. In each case, we're trying to build up our commitment because there's a lot of work to do out there. So on street paving, the recommendation this year is $330,000. How far that goes depends in part on the price of asphalt, and it depends in part also on the amount of state aid that we get. This is an area where we do usually get state funding, and if depending on the size of the grant that we get, we stretch this $330,000 out as far as we can. The list of streets that are being paved is determined based on a combination of deteriorated condition and the location, the frequency of use, demand for the community. And you're always informed of that list at the time that we ask you to award a bid to actually get the work done. The sidewalks are an area where, frankly, we could spend several times this much money and still be struggling to keep up. We just have a lot of sidewalk in town. That's a great thing. It's a very walkable community, but it's a very old infrastructure in most cases in a pretty deteriorated condition. Over the last several years, we've been inching this number up. In the capital plan for the future, we're proposing to get this up incrementally over the next couple of years up to $100,000. This year, we're asking for $75,000 for sidewalk repair and replacement. And then there's 2 smaller items that are preparing for much larger work to come. The roof at the skating rink needs to be replaced. We want to do the engineering work to prepare for that. For a estimated cost of $15,000 in FY21. And likewise, in preparation for the repair or replacement of the maintenance building at Living Memorial Park, $15,000 for the engineering work on that. So that's the projects list. Again, that sits within the context of a 5-year plan that we can go into in greater detail if you'd like. As this conversation unfolds. The rest of the capital request for FY21 is vehicles and equipment. This is the first year of the 25-year capital equipment replacement plan that we prepared last year. We've updated it and tweaked it this year. And it's an exciting threshold moment for us because as part of the ongoing effort to improve our long-term planning and increase particularly budgetary stability and tax rate stability going forward. This is one of the key aspects of that. If we are relatively level funding our equipment replacement, there's a few different benefits that accrue. One is that it doesn't have wild fluctuations up and down that have impacts on either the tax rate or offsetting that, the ability to invest in other things. So an example is the first couple of years that I was here, we had fire trucks that were very old and had been run to the end of their useful life. And literally, in one case, had to be taken off the road because it had failed, and in the other case was failing at the time and really urgently needed to be replaced. When an item of that magnitude needs to be replaced in that manner, it crowds out a lot else that we need to do, or it requires a spike in taxes in order to be able to afford it. So we've struggled through some of those things. There had been a pattern for quite a long time of replacing things as they wore out, rather than at least slightly ahead of that. What we have been working towards with the support of prior select boards, and now we're asking for you to embrace this and move forward with the implementation of something that's been in development for the last couple of years, is instead a practice of planning ahead for relatively equal amounts of money, just very slightly increasing over the years, to replace equipment on a schedule. I want to assure, I know you don't need this, but I'll reassure you and assure the public, these schedules are long. We're not talking about replacing things, when they're still relatively new, but with prudent expected useful lives. So things like about 10 years on some of the dump trucks, longer on things like graders and loaders, 20 years on a fire truck, 25 years on a ladder truck. With useful lives that are actually, still quite extended in many cases for particularly the bigger pieces of equipment, but putting them on a schedule so we can see them coming well in advance and we can level out the funding that's necessary for them. We get not only the financial stability that comes from that, but we also then keep the fleet in better condition. The vehicles and equipment that are being used to serve the community are in better condition because we're not wearing them all the way to failure and then replacing them as an emergency. We're replacing them before they completely wear out. And because of that, the additional benefit is that there is resale value. At the time that they're traded in and the new piece of equipment is put online, we gain the technology advancement that's occurred in putting the new piece of equipment into service, and we can help pay for that transition with the value of the trade-in on the piece of equipment. There are obviously from different types of equipment across the wide array of types of equipment that we need in order to provide the services that are so varied across the departments of the town. The particulars of how much trade-in value is usually left in a particular type of equipment, how frequently something needs to be replaced, how much the technology changes over the life cycle of a piece of equipment. There's obviously a lot of variation in that. We can go into anywhere you'd like to go with more information on particular pieces of equipment, either in this year's list or in the broader 25-year plan. But the overall principle is important, and we're asking you to embrace it and support it by funding these requests this year as the first year of the implementation of that practice. So the specific items are 2 for recreation and parks, a replacement of a 1984 Ford compact tractor, or actually to buy a Ford compact tractor that is replacing a piece of equipment from 1984. There's a walk-behind mower that is replacing a 2008 model. $27,000 is the request for the tractor and $12,000 for the mower. We always have a recurring item of hardware that isn't specific to any particular department, but computer hardware. This is also, we put this on a practice when we went through the IT improvement plan a few years back. One of the things that we did in improving those practices is to put a specific rotation on for our pieces of computer equipment. And so $30,000 is the request for this year for the rotational replacement of the computer hardware. In the Department of Public Works, there's one request this year, a $15,000 rough mower. This is related to primarily roadside maintenance, and Steve can explain in greater detail about the difference between a rough mower and a fine mower and why we operate those pieces of equipment, if you'd like. A very exciting aspect of the request this year are the 2 police vehicles that we're requesting. So there's a memorandum in the backup materials for this meeting that the select board members have seen, and it's been available online. People can look at it still on the town's website if you want to go see the explanation from the police department about this. There are now hybrid vehicles available for police use. These were introduced for the first time just last year, and at that time, Chief Fitzgerald provided a report that showed a healthy amount of caution about the fact that this was a brand new technology for police use, and that we should be careful to make sure that it actually was going to stand up to the really sort of significant demands of police vehicles that are operating virtually 24/7. And so we thought that it might be a few years of waiting to see how the new technology was performing. He's written a memo dated November 8th that's in the backup that explains how the performance was so favorable during this first year of testing by other police departments that he now has the confidence to recommend that we replace our police vehicles with hybrid vehicles. And there's a benefit not only in sort of the overarching general benefit to less consumption of gas and so on, of converting to the more sustainable technology, but very specifically for police use at scenes when they pull over to the, pull up to a scene where people are going to get out of the car and do extended work out of the car. The vehicle often needs to be left idling because the lights are going and there's a lot of equipment that is powered inside the vehicle that might need to be used during the course of managing the incident. And so that all needed its power source, and its power source was the engine of the vehicle. Because of the hybrid technology with very robust batteries in them, being able to power the equipment and the lights during the periods of time when the vehicle is not in motion, the idling is eliminated, and so there's a significant benefit to air quality as well as just being better.
Peter, a quick question.
Sure.
Are these plug-in hybrids that could be plugged in overnight to recharge the batteries? Because otherwise they have to be charged up with
Captain,
when they're running.
Please.
Mark Kerrigan with the police department. They're not
Not
plug-in hybrids. They're battery is charged by the motor when it is running.
Great, thanks.
So, sorry.
I just need to understand how this memo in the
Yes.
backup relates to this chart.
Sure. So it relates to the two items that are labeled PD. So there is a Chevrolet Trailblazer that's being replaced, a 2009 Trailblazer, and there's a 2016 Ford Explorer. Those two vehicles are being replaced by comparable modern equipment that will be in both cases hybrid vehicles.
Thank you.
And then there's two fire department requests, a fire alarm radio box for $33,000. You'll recognize this looks familiar because there was an item that was part of finishing off the police fire facilities project that was a question for last year's town meeting, was approved there. This is the same type of equipment to be housed. The piece that we bought last year was to be housed in the dispatch center. This one here will be housed at the central fire station, and the need for the two is to meet an NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association, or Protection?
National Fire
Protection Association. So the NFPA creates standards for basically measuring the readiness of fire departments across the country, and in part, that's important because it relates to the ISO reviews that happen. The Insurance Services Office comes and does ratings, and people's fire insurance rates in the community are affected by the ISO ratings. So we try to comply with the NFPA standards, and there is one that recommends redundancy for these radio boxes because the box is essential to providing the right response to the right property when there is an alarm that goes off at a property. So this building is a good example. So there's pull boxes all over the place. If there was a fire in the building, either an alarm triggered by either a pull box or by a sensor that kicked on the alarm here in the building, that tells the fire department to come to this building only if this radio box is working. And so they recommend redundancy in case there's a problem up at dispatch so that the fire department would receive it directly at Central Station. We recommend that you authorize the purchase of the box. And the final item is the biggest item from this year's list. It is a replacement of a 1994 fire engine. I'd reiterate here that our practice now going forward is going to be to replace engines on a 20-year cycle. This one here is actually 25 years old and is in poor condition. And so you have a memorandum in your backup that explains that in more detail from the fire department. And we would recommend that this purchase certainly be made. It's important to note that in the fleet of fire engines, they've actually been reduced by 2 over the past decade or so. In one case by actually eliminating a piece of equipment entirely, and in another case by combining 2 different pieces, the functions of 2 pieces of equipment into one. So while these are very expensive pieces of equipment, they're replaced only occasionally, and are we're as efficiently we sort of are down to our minimum allocation of fire engines to be able to provide the service that's necessary for the community. And so one last thing about that is this would be the last time that we'd be in a position where we need to come up with the whole $550,000 for this fire engine in 1 year. Part of equalizing or relatively equalizing, stabilizing the cost of equipment replacement over the years is by setting aside money each year towards the purchase of fire engines so that we can gain interest earnings on that money while it's preparing, or accruing to be spent. And then at the time when we need to buy a fire engine, as rare as they are, when they come, they're very expensive. And so we have the money available in the fund and can go buy the fire engine without having to pay interest from borrowing and without having to have a spike in the tax rate. And so in order to move into that program, we've replaced several fire engines in the last few years. We need to replace this one, and then it's going to be years before we'll need to replace another one. And during that time, we will accrue the funds to move into that better practice.
Why is this replacement so much less than the original cost of the fire truck? It was $189,952. We're
Yes.
replacing it with one that's $550,000.
Because the $189,952 was expended in 1994.
Oh, okay.
That's just inflation. And I'm sure it relates also to the
Technology.
The technology on the truck is much more advanced now than it was at that time, but to a great degree, it's inflation. Patrick?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I just have noticed something, a minor correction that I kind of feel I need to call out.
Okay.
The DPW, the HD 63B, that's actually the fine mower and not the rough mower.
Okay.
Same price, same everything else, but just a correction I wanted to call out. And
Thank you.
if you have questions about it, I know Steve can speak to its need, but.
Thank you. So that's the list. We recommend approval, but this is a significant investment each year, and it is this year, and so we expect you'll have some questions, and we're ready to have a conversation with you about it.
And this is not a surprise to any of us. We've seen these coming.
Right.
Because we have the long-range plan.
Peter, could you get an estimate for what it would cost to, I can't imagine that the pool house could be upgraded, but, so I guess it would be for replacement. An estimate for what that would cost to add to this and what the tax impact would be. Again, it's not anywhere in the next 5 years. It was supposed
Correct.
to be 3 years ago, and it's
Yep.
really, it needs to be done. So I don't know if it's been 20, I don't know how many years old it is, but it's older than the fire trucks. for
It's
sure.
old and it's sad. I'd
Sorry,
like to put in perspective why it has dropped off the list. We've had some conversation within staff of struggling to try to express this in a way that's less about some bureaucratic things and more about sort of experiences we've all had. And so the metaphor I would use is it's like painting the house. Painting the house is not only something you want to do, it makes your house look better, but it's something you really need to do from time to time to keep the house in good shape, right? It provides protection. So it's an important thing to plan for and do. But if as you approach the moment when you're going to actually paint the house after planning on it for years, the furnace goes, then there's only so much money, so many resources to be able to invest in the facilities. And so it's our estimation that the work that has emerged at the rink, the need to replace the roof, which is original to the 1975 construction of the building, and to replace the refrigerant system that keeps the ice functional. Because it's also original to the building with some modifications to some components of it over the years, but the refrigerant that's used inside that existing system is no longer going to be manufactured anymore. And so it's going to become more and more expensive and less available. And so over the next few years, we need to phase it out. The emergence of those as very significant costs that together will be over $1 million of investment caused us to view the pool house as, and the fact, I would say, that we've done the essential work at the pool. We've stemmed the leaks and we've safed up the deck. Those were high priorities in the phases of work at the pool. We agree that we need to find time and find money to upgrade the pool house, which is old and sad. But it was our estimation that the situation at the rink constitutes something like a furnace failing. That means we need to postpone further the painting of the house. Having said that, your request, Dave, is let's get a cost so you know what that would take if this board was willing to fund it. And we'd be happy to get a ballpark. I don't think we have a solid number, and it would take some time and money to get a really reliable number. But what we can do certainly is give it a look and come back with at least a thumbnail of what we think it would cost to upgrade it.
Yeah, I know the roof and the refrigerant conversion, that's over $1.5 million.
Yes.
Is 2 years off. It's not, so it's coming down the road, so it's not like, I understand what you're saying about the furnace and the metaphor.
Right.
But, so yeah, just see if we can get in the ballpark.
Sure.
And then we can have a look at the tax impact. 'Cause, sure. if when you say that, we don't, if the furnace goes and you only have a certain amount of money, well, we do only have a certain amount of money, but we also have responsibility to maintain these things and keep them functional, and particularly, and this one is particularly valuable to our most marginalized young people. So I'd like us to have a look and see if we want to consider doing it.
It's on the list for us to bring you back some additional information as you
Okay, and
continue
another
on in the
question,
process.
which is a little bit farther down the line, but looking at 23, it looks like we're planning on $5 million worth of bonding.
Yep.
And a lot of these are 20-year plus investments, so it makes sense to bond for them.
Right.
But why all at once?
So there's two different things going on there, and it relates to what we discussed in the overview of the budget, related to what happens. One of the benefits of levelizing the equipment replacement is it helps us to focus more clearly on both what the project needs are and how to plan and afford for implementing those. When we are sort of trying to catch the most urgent, failing things both on the project side and on the equipment side, that's when we're not able to manage the flow of funds. Because of the funding that's required for the equipment replacement, we're proposing it's 700 and something this year.
Just the equipment?
The equipment is, sorry, I don't have that right at hand. $763,000, and then increasing slightly over time over the next several years, and then about basically level for about a decade from the mid-20s to the mid-30s, and then slightly increasing again after that. In order to accomplish the benefits that we've already talked about related to that, it meant increasing the funding for projects this year, because last year was a year when we went down in the funding of projects in order to afford more on the project side of the needs. So we have the reverse happening here, which left less money for projects, which is why we then looked at this upcoming need to spend literally millions of dollars at both the Memorial Park, primarily at the rink, but not exclusively at the rink, but on facilities that are 50 years and older, and at the Public Works facility, which is something we've actually been working towards over these last several years. We've actually already spent money that you've authorized on planning level work. That's why you don't see a planning request for the Public Works piece here, because we've already got that underway. Planning now in order to come back next year with really good information about these different facilities so that we can be prepared to go out for town meeting bond approval to implement these as a package project. The reason, direct answer to your question of why all at once is if we're going to bond facilities, it makes sense to bond them in a, first of all, these are facilities that are all wearing out at the same time. It's not like we could say, well, let's do one now and one 5 years from now. And so if we're going to need to do them within a couple of years of each other, it makes sense to plan them together and execute them together so you've got a larger borrow, which makes your position in the market more favorable.
And we're not looking at the water plant because that'll be a utility fund
Correct.
process.
That's right. It'll be, that will be a separate source of funds. We'll be borrowing that directly from the state, and it's a whole separate.
It's going to be an excellent
process.
couple of years for large construction companies
It is.
in southern Vermont.
It is. It's going to be, and the planning we need to do in the next year or so in order to be ready for those decisions, in order to then be ready for implementing the projects, is significant.
Wow.
I have a few things, just to break it open a little bit. Sidewalk repair and replacement.
Yep.
Can you remind us what we sank into capital in the last couple of years? I know we've been increasing intentionally.
Sure.
We increased it once, I think.
So, what I can tell you about that, I'm sorry, I don't have the
I should've
multi-year
wondered.
history. What I
I
can
think
tell
it
you
was
is it
50.
started a lot lower than this. My recollection is $25,000 when we started to increase it incrementally about 5 years ago.
Okay.
We're up to asking for 75. I think it was 60 this past year. We're asking for 75 this year. We want to get it to 100 and then keep it there.
And how does it relate in practical purposes, and Steve, jump in if you want to, but
Bucks a foot.
to the 27.5K in operating? Like, how does that, is the operating a yearly ask?
So, come on up, Steve. It's small jobs and larger jobs.
Yeah.
Steve will explain the details.
So within the operation budget, there's funds for small repairs. So the $75,000 is for capital, larger improvements, large sections of sidewalk, up to that amount of $75,000. So some of that work we would try to contract out. We've also had a discussion earlier in the budget about hiring some seasonal employees that would enable us to use full-time staff to get more sidewalks done, and that would come out of capital also.
Okay. So describe to me, when you talk about larger scale projects, does that mean a block? Does that mean?
Well, the last large capital project we did was from Bird Street up to Maple Street. And that was about $100 per foot. And that took, so this would be 750 feet. So large isn't that large when we're talking amount of money, but we hope to double that or even maybe triple it if we use the seasonal help and our own employees. So we're basically, this is going to pay for more raw materials and then some labor and some fuel out of our regular budget.
Right, right.
To get the most we can out of, what we have.
I'm just trying to fully understand it, because I get a lot of people asking me about sidewalks and bumping up that replacement schedule.
Yeah, we're certainly open to spending even more. The thing that is driving it at the 75 as the request for this year and then getting to 100 and levelizing is just that balancing act of so many other things we also need to be doing.
Absolutely.
But we completely agree. It's why we've been pushing this higher over the last few years, that for our community, especially as important as walking is, and becoming more important again now with the change in sort of values of individuals and the community around using vehicles less and walking and biking more, it becomes even more important for us to keep the sidewalks in good shape, and we got a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah, the last few years, it has been up in the 60, 70,000, and prior to that, we were doing like 20,000. So in the last few years, we've taken great strides to increase that budget, because there is a lot of discussion about walking.
And I think I've seen in the past that you do keep a pretty good track of sort of conditions.
Oh, yeah.
We actually did a complete survey of every sidewalk in town this year. A company we had come in and they surveyed every single sidewalk, and we're reviewing all that information now. And that'll be utilized to determine if there's small repairs or if there's larger sections that need to be done.
Yeah, I'm just curious to be able to kind of match that up with community expectations on well-traveled paths and all that stuff, but I'm sure you're kind of on top of that.
That'd be cool to see that.
Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, it'd be great stuff to look at some point. Thanks. I guess my other question was, why are we replacing a 2016 Ford Explorer?
Because that's one of the frontline vehicles that we have on a 4-year cycle. The other one is a vehicle that's been used, I believe, by the detectives, which is why it's much older, because it doesn't get nearly the use that a patrol vehicle
Oh,
gets.
okay. So does the P7 designation refer to frontline versus?
Patrol versus detective.
Oh, okay.
Original
Sorry, Mark.
Trailblazer.
You're doing a great job of standing up and sitting down.
It's good exercise.
Also, good job on the beard. I can't even get there myself. Shouldn't even try. Okay. Yeah, just, it gets a lot of use.
Yeah,
That's basically
exactly. And the
answer.
patrol vehicles, again, that's part of the scheduled program. And I will say, actually, that's something we've been doing now for a while. So even when we had a practice of kind of scrambling around other types of vehicles that have longer life, we've been replacing the patrol vehicles on a 4-year cycle because we just wear them out otherwise.
I wonder if the hybrid nature of the vehicle will lead to a slightly longer life.
Who knows?
Well, certainly,
Fun to
We'll
watch.
have to
in
see.
theory, the engine.
Yeah.
Right.
It also has, instead of having one engine, it has two. And if it was purely electrical, I think there are like 16 moving parts. So it could be actually more costly depending on how things wear out. We'll see.
We will see.
My little Prius is keeping on ticking. So.
Oh, yeah, me too. Good job.
Please. Yeah.
I just want to correct one thing that that Mr. Scholes just said about having two engines. These hybrids don't. It's just a gas motor. There's no electric function to actually move the cruiser.
Really?
I
Yep.
didn't know that. Okay,
Yes.
thanks for that
So
clarification.
the hybrid aspect of it is a really robust, probably lithium battery of some
Yes.
sort that allows us to not run it during incidents like Peter talked about, car crashes, car stops. An officer on the side of the road running radar or
But it's not
monitoring
going
an
to be
intersection.
running, there's not a motor to run the vehicle.
Correct. There's no
So,
motor
yeah.
that like causes
Right.
locomotion, if you will, to
Right.
to the vehicle.
Which is the more
But when a car's
traditional
on the
hybrid.
side of the road, you know, cruiser's on the side of the road running radar or monitoring an intersection or something, it does run not only all the electronics that Peter talked about, but air conditioning, heat, all of that is run off of the battery as well. So it really will reduce the amount of idle time
Oh, yeah.
quite
That's great.
significantly.
It's a
Yeah.
great start.
Yeah.
I mean, and for that.
And that's well, I wouldn't say well over. It's probably fully half, 40% of the engine run time is just idling, which is terrible for gas motors. So, you know, you mentioned will we get longer life? There are a lot of questions we don't know. Is the maintenance going to be higher? Is the maintenance going to be lower? The vehicle itself is a little bit more expensive. We don't know. Maintenance could be lower or higher. We don't really know. So. It's going to be we'll see over a couple of years how it goes.
Thanks for that clarification. That's important.
Sure.
Glad we're taking the plunge, and I'm glad that something is coming on the market.
Yeah.
So, my last question. I ran into Lenny at the dentist.
You feeling better,
Seems
Lenny?
inappropriate already.
And I said, so didn't we just buy you a fire truck? Was the joke. 2, yeah.
Not that
No,
this
I
is
just
a
thought I'd
surprise.
give these guys an opportunity to talk about the fire truck need. Is this the right time to do that?
Yeah, everybody doesn't read the community doesn't read the backup materials.
It's true.
This is Lenny's project.
Oh,
No,
I don't have to blame you.
Yeah.
So you're all right, we did replace an engine in 2018 or 2017 that's the truck that we made, took 2 trucks and made it into one.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the ladder truck, which failed on us. We bought a replacement for a short period of time, and now we've replaced that, and now we're on to this. The engine 2, which originally the frame went on it, we expected a longer life out of it. It didn't happen. So now we're here with that. Now we're here replacing engine 1, which is 25 years old, which should be replaced. And as the town manager stated earlier, once this truck is purchased from here on out with the funding that we've put into place, it's going to be much easier to replace these trucks. As you can see from the increase of 1994 from 189,000 to 550,000 today. 2028 and 2032, you can imagine how much the trucks are going to be then.
But I see on the capital plan that you don't have to buy another big ticket item until 2038.
Two will be long gone by then.
2028, engine 3 gets replaced, and then 2032, engine 4 gets replaced.
Yeah, and the reason for that actually highlights this savings account aspect of it for the fire trucks. So there's a separate schedule for the replacement of the fire trucks. We can provide that to you. The plan, the 25-year plan, shows the funding of setting aside the funds for the fire trucks.
I see.
Starting at $110,000 next year. So we spend the $550 to buy this year's truck.
Right.
And then next year, we set aside $110, the year after that, $115,
And so on.
very slowly increasing like that over time, so that there's enough set aside to buy the trucks in the future.
Layaway.
Great. Yes, layaway. Question about that setting aside money. So like,
Christmas.
the other couple of years back, you guys did the money market
Yes.
accounts, and that seems to be doing pretty well.
Yep.
Is there a way that we can kind of set aside this money and collect
Absolutely.
interest on it?
Yeah, the money will be invested. It'll be invested, super safely. There's no risk
Right.
taken with these funds, so it's not as much as you might earn if you took some risk with it. But we will be earning, by doing it this way, we're going to be earning interest on that money to help us pay for the future replacement of the equipment instead of borrowing, which is what we've had to do often
Yeah.
in the past because of the significant cost of these vehicles. When they come on us fast, we end up borrowing and paying interest to the bank in order to buy them. So
Great.
over the long haul, we think this is just a completely superior method.
Yes.
It will take some management of those funds to make sure that we are earning a good interest rate and we are ready to make the purchases when it comes time to make them.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ricky?
Hi, Ricky Rosati, District 2, and upon hearing that the batteries are lithium-based, I just want to extend a general message that to make sure that whatever resources are put into the budget are coming from fair trade and ethical resources, because I have not personally researched with evidence, but I have heard from, I'm not seeing news that I necessarily trust, but I just heard that there was a recent U.S.-backed military coup in Bolivia based on us trying to exploit their lithium resources. And so I just value a real importance in making sure that both like the natural resources that are incorporated into all of these services that we benefit from are coming from sustainable and fair practices.
Thank you for that information, Ricky. That's good. Are there further questions or comments?
Yeah. I'm curious about the roof at the rink. I guess I'd kind of just like to hear a little bit more about like the state of it and what this engineering scope is going to be. And
1975.
yeah, I guess I didn't hear that. So I can hear that again louder. Yeah.
Okay, great. Teasing.
So the rink roof, the rink was built in 1975. So that's over 40 years old.
Yeah.
And it's 30,000 square feet. So metal roofing that over the years has deteriorated. And the reason we need to get the engineers involved to make sure that the integrity of the girders that we have are going to be able to withstand any load that we're putting on there, because what we would be doing is insulating that roof as well.
Great.
So we don't want to be putting insulation on a roof that we already know can hold so much snow, but if we're going to add to it 30,000 square feet of roofing, that it's going to be able to withstand that.
Great.
That answer your
Thanks.
question?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ken.
And theoretically more snow.
Theoretically, some amount of snow.
More snow than before. If it's insulated, it's going to be holding more.
True.
Not a lot of heat coming out of that.
And actually, Carol, I had a tractor question. The Ford compact tractor from 1984.
What?
You want to buy it?
Yeah, it was a good year. It was a good year, I heard. I'm kind of curious, like, what that equipment does.
It's one of the many workhorses that we have. As you see at Living Memorial Park, the hill, its biggest job is to maintain that hill. You know, so there's, you know, up and down, the rough terrain. In addition to that, it handles a lot of three-point attachments, augers, rakes. So that's the biggest job it has is in the widespread mowing for the hill.
Okay.
We'll give you a good deal on it, Daniel.
Yeah, I can see myself coming around retiring that. Those are like the specific questions, but I also kind of wanted to propose a policy. And I know that you're
Is that
collecting
why you
little
wore the suit
ideas. No.
Propose a what? I'm
A
sorry.
policy.
A policy.
Yeah. So I was thinking about like our use of fossil fuels in the town, as I sometimes do. And, you know, maybe one of the places where we can plan to get off fossil fuels is our kind of long-term equipment replacement plan and our capital plans. You know, and like earlier in the year, we had a lot of conversations about needing to take X, Y, and Z steps by such and such a year. And, you know, some of these pieces of equipment that we're purchasing are going to extend, say, past like 2030, hopefully, right? And as we look to buy a piece of equipment that's going to have a life past, say, 2030, I think we should be looking to see whether or not that equipment is going to kind of keep us locked into fossil fuel technology, or whether there are options, and just like the police department did, you know, and I commend you all for that. Look into options that get us away from fossil fuel use. You know, so I'm thinking about like equipment, but I'm also thinking about buildings. You know, I'm glad to hear that the rink roof will be insulated, and that'll reduce, you know, our energy use. And I'm also thinking about like the public works building, like hope and pray that that building will be heated by something other than oil or gas.
I think if we can't look at that in the long-term plan.
Going to be a lot to talk about
Yes,
at Public Works.
it will,
It's,
no doubt.
it's a facility that is, in many ways, past its useful life,
Yeah.
and even the places that are still,
Yeah, I mean,
like strong and functional, are not. We have parts of the facility that are not safe.
Right.
So that just it needs to be addressed. And you're talking about a heating plant, but my assurance to you is there's going to be such dramatic changes. We don't know the details yet, but we know that it's going to change so dramatically, whether it's an upgrade of the existing or more likely a replacement, that when we come and go through that in detail, it'll be an opportunity to do lots of system upgrades to more sustainable methods, in addition to addressing the operational needs.
Great.
I think people have asked us in various creative ways to show
Yes.
commitment, and if we can't show commitment in the long-term plan, then I would assume that we should just go ahead and tell people we can't show commitment in anything.
I hear you.
So I agree with that comment.
May I add one more quick thing on that topic, which is...
And then I do have one community member.
Yeah, we also are in the latter stages of the recruitment for the sustainability coordinator position. That's a person we expect to add to town staff sometime very early in the new year. And these are the kinds of things that we'll be able to spend more time looking at, utilizing that person's expertise.
Great.
Liz, and then I want to get to a community
That was, I
member.
had the same comment as well.
Wow,
That's fine.
Mine did.
we're done. Yes.
Again, name is Witherbee, Brattleboro resident. I just had a question, sort of on curiosity, especially given the topic, sustainability, and actually a question on sort of the vehicles that are no longer going to be used. And I was wondering if there's what kind of plan y'all have instated to do with these vehicles after they're not used. Like, are they sold for parts? Are they donated to somewhere? Especially thinking, if we put them in a junker and there, it's gone, we're not gonna worry about it. It's sort of it doesn't I just want to know if there's a plan to dealing with things that we don't use anymore in a safe, sustainable way, and possibly maybe selling some parts as a way to bring in some income. I'm not sure.
So we actually do that with the vehicles, particularly almost every one that's being replaced gets traded in. The ones that have just failed, we have had some that got junked, and in some cases got some money for parts, in some cases just sold the vehicle for scrap. But in other cases, in most cases, what we do is we're actually trading a vehicle that's got some value in it. Part of the longer term plan is to be trading vehicles, again, not when they're still young and new, but before they're so close to the end of their useful life that they actually still have decent trade-in value that helps us buy the next piece of equipment. So that's what mostly happens. With certain specialty pieces of equipment, there have been unique circumstances. So we had a transition with our aerial ladder truck in the fire department where we had one that failed. So we bought one used that tided us over for a couple of years while we were having a new one built. The new one is now in service, so the used one we had bought was very old but in decent shape. And so we were able to resell that one, and we actually got a couple of years use out of it for not quite free, but almost.
And then last week there was a police car that is now given to the fire department.
That's true. So that's a rarer instance, but very occasionally we'll have a situation where another department needs a vehicle and doesn't need something new. And so we'll rotate the replaced vehicle within the town operations. So that particular situation is we have firefighters who go off to training and have been having to use larger vehicles that are more expensive, consume more gas and so on, that without having to buy a sedan, now they've got a sedan that they can go off to training in. It won't get a lot of extra miles, but it's still in good enough shape to serve that purpose and make for more efficient operation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot to ask on behalf of John Allen if I could get a ride in the new fire truck.
Insurance prohibits. Yeah.
You can go on the new track.
You're supposed to say no. You never say yes.
You said no to John.
Oh! I hope he's listening. I hope he's listening.
From Mike. Nicely said.
That's
He
great.
says to all of Brattleboro.
That was perfect.
If it
can get a
happens that
ride.
he's not watching, I'm going to take that piece of tape and put that, send that to him.
In general, to the full circle of all of us, are there further questions or comments on the capital?
So the one takeaway I have from tonight is to get a rough estimate. It's going to be very much an order of magnitude estimate, not a budget estimate, but we will get that for you regarding the pool house so you can give that some consideration later on.
We had some, obviously the numbers changed, but there were some numbers a few years ago.
Yeah,
They were saying, that's what it was?
really old.
Yeah, okay.
Really old numbers. We'll take a new look at it, but again, we'll be doing that within staff. We won't be paying somebody to do it, so we'll explain to you how we estimated it when we bring you the estimate.
Great. Okay. All right. Put our blue binders away now.
Sure.
We're done with both?
We're done with both.
Okay.
And we now move back to our green binders. Good night, everybody from the departments. Thanks for staying so late. And we are moving to item F under new business. And that is the Brownfields Grant.
So this is a request for you to authorize us to apply for a $200,000 EPA Brownfields Assessment Grant. We had one previously that we received that was addressing both petroleum and general hazards, and I'm looking for my notes on it, forgive me. Here it is. So we received one that funded for the last 3 years both petroleum site assessment and just general brownfield assessment. We've been able to be really successful at using the brownfield money. Examples of that are the assessment of the former Reformer building as part of the police department project, assessment of 250 Bird Street to further the floodplain restoration project at that location, hazardous building material survey for the groundworks project on South Main Street, funding the corrective action design for the outside of the amphitheater at the New England Youth Theater, helping with the indoor air testing at properties owned by the Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center, and the partnership with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation that is helping the Long Falls paperboard redevelopment with their Phase 2 environmental testing. So a lot of work has been done that has assisted in both the readiness and the actual readiness for redevelopment and the actual redevelopment of properties in Brattleboro using the prior EPA funding. But we struggled to spend the petroleum funds. Those have particular strings attached to them where there's some legal aspects that tie to the ownership of the properties, as well as it having to be so specific to petroleum issues as opposed to general hazard issues. So our intent this time is not to go for both pieces, but to focus on the general hazards program. And we're filing a $200,000 grant application. Hopeful, cautiously optimistic, because we have had success. We've got good relationships with the folks at the EPA, but we need your authority so that we can proceed with the application.
Great. Questions or comments? Liz?
So, as a member of the Planning Commission, I was able to witness two things about Sue Fillion. First, that she was able to obtain these very large grants, and she's really an expert at writing the grant, receiving the grant, keeping excellent relationships with the EPA, and I applaud her for that. I also got to witness her strategic use of these funds for a variety of projects throughout Brattleboro to help property owners assess and plan for the redevelopment of their property, and also give them excellent advice. And I certainly support this effort as well.
Sue's definitely an asset. Further questions or comments?
Not from me.
From Ricky, Franz, or I forgot your name already, but I wrote it down. Oh, it's in the blue binder though, which is down there. Okay,
Would you like a motion?
I would love a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve an application in the amount of $200,000 for a Brownfields assessment grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Okay, Tim has made that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Move on to committee appointments. It's pretty easy.
Pretty easy.
Who would like to read them?
Looks like we've got Raymond Doyle going for a position on the cemetery committee, right? Millicent Cooley for the energy committee. Millicent was part of the team of people that prepared the research for the sustainability coordinator
Oh, I
presentation.
recognize that name.
And Nicholas Biddle is looking to be fence viewer.
Okay. Those are the same amount of appointees as there were vacancies on those committees, so that's exciting. And would somebody like to move the slate of nominees?
I move the slate of nominees.
Fantastic. David moves the slate of nominees. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations and thank you. There's always a list of available committee opportunities, and it's a great way to be involved with the town. Jan.
Before you adjourn,
You said the magic word.
a small piece of business, we're going to go right back to the very beginning of the meeting where we approved the minutes.
Yes.
Ricky Rosati is listed in public participation as referring to a tree on the endangered tree, the endangered list.
Yes.
And it's actually the treasured list, and she asks the board to approve that change.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Very good. Do we need a motion to do so, Jan?
Please
Move that we
amend
amend
the minutes.
minutes to reflect that change.
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Minutes are so amended. Thank you, Ricky, for bringing that to our attention. At this time, at 9:15, we will adjourn this meeting. Oh, wait, is there a motion? I'm not allowed to just adjourn meetings. So moved. All in favor? Aye. Now we're adjourned.
Thanks, BCTV.
It's the only time I like to wield my power for some reason is adjourning the meeting.
I'll give you that one.
Thanks. All right. Ew.